Get ready for 4+ hours of pure boxing content. Enjoy.
BDA Boxing. What you see is what you get.
Nothing quite catches a fan's passion like the best fighting the best. When the bout involves heavyweights, the frenzy reaches its peak. In 1999, Lennox Lewis was a man in search of an identity. Of Jamaican descent, Lewis was born in England. Later, during his childhood, he moved to Canada, where he began boxing. He represented the nation in the 1984 Olympics. Failing to medal, he tried again in 1988, capping off a stellar amateur career by winning gold. Lewis turned pro thereafter, but the Canadian boxing scene was ill-equipped for big-time boxing. And so, Lewis returned to England, expecting a hero's welcome. But the Brits failed to fully embrace him. To them, he was a chameleon in their midst, and contender Frank Bruno remained their hero. Another problem plaguing Lewis since the amateur days was his style. Despite standing at 6 feet and 5 inches tall, Lewis refused to press his advantages. Still, the knockouts came early in his career, and the victims included Mike Weaver, Tyrell Biggs, and Donovan Racer Ruddock. The American Riddick Bowe was considered the heavyweight champion, but boxing politics interfered when he refused to fight Lewis. Thus, the Brit was awarded the WBC belt. In 1993, Lewis defended it against British hero Frank Bruno. He was a tough start for Lewis, but he prevailed by stopping Bruno in the 7th round. Still, Lewis remained a confusing figure, a reluctant giant with punching power, and a dull personality who often displayed genuine disdain for his opponents. For many, Lewis was exposed when he met veteran Oliver McCall in 1994. With a big right hand, the American soiled Lewis's perfect record. So now, not only was Lewis mentally unfit for the big time, but his chin was ill-equipped as well. Undeterred, he hired the man who trained McCall to beat him, the legendary Emmanuel Stewart. Lewis scored victories over contenders Tommy Morrison and Ray Mercer, the latter being a vicious war. The bout showed Lewis's grit, but now the critics questioned his talent. When he boxed, he was a scared giant, and when he slugged, he was a simple-minded lummox. For Lewis, there was no pleasing the public. This lack of public support allowed a comebacking Mike Tyson to avoid defending his title against the Brit. And so, a 31-year-old Lewis fought for a vacant belt against his old nemesis, Oliver McCall. Lewis scored his revenge in a bizarre bout, in which the unhinged American refused to fight.
Well, I've seen some strange things in boxing. That is surely one of the strangest.
Lewis followed it up with a slow dance against Henrry Armstrong, which the Brit won by disqualification. In the fall of 1997, he blasted out contender Andrew Golota. Lewis was in his physical prime, but he was not considered the best heavyweight in the world. In 1984, the American Evander Holyfield grabbed the bronze medal at the Summer Olympics. From there, he unified the unheralded cruiserweight division. But his bout with the legendarily tough Dwight Muhammad Qawi previewed Holyfield's future: deft skills, controlled aggression, and entertaining fights. After becoming the cruiserweight king, Holyfield moved up to the heavyweight division. Standing at 6 feet and 2.5 inches in height, Holyfield was undersized by modern standards. Still, he defeated an assortment of titleists and contenders, such as James Tillis, Pinklon Thomas, Michael Dokes, and Alex Stewart. In those fights, Holyfield displayed an indomitable will, superb conditioning, and a cruiserweight's pace. But he also showed vulnerability, often veering on the feet before pouncing on his foes. In 1990, Buster Douglas shocked the world when he took the championship from the seemingly invincible Mike Tyson. Holyfield took on an undisciplined Douglas that very year and halted him in 3 rounds. Contrary to Lewis's predicament in England, Holyfield enjoyed his countrymen's adulation. And unlike Lewis, Holyfield knew how he wanted to box, by risking it all. Bouts against aging stars such as George Foreman and Larry Holmes proved sizzling affairs. as did a slugfest against French contender Bert Cooper, a bout that saw Holyfield badly hurt before rallying back to score a win. But how long could Holyfield last as a professional? The answer appeared to come in 1992, when Holyfield met the undefeated silver medalist, Riddick Bowe. Holyfield slugged it out against the bigger man in what became one of the best heavyweight fights of all time. But Bowe was too big and too good. Holyfield lost his titles. Displaying the same determination outside the ring that he showed inside, Holyfield planned a comeback. He hired Emanuel Stewart for a 1993 Bowe rematch. It was another war. But Holyfield's superior conditioning saw him through, as he regained the championship via majority decision. And some believed Holyfield could have stopped Bowe had it not been for the untimely arrival of the Fan Man, which gave an ailing Bowe a chance to recover. But the comeback was cut short in 1994, when Holyfield lost his championship to former light heavyweight champion McCallum Moore. Holyfield was later diagnosed with a heart condition, and his career appeared over. But citing divine intervention, Holyfield returned in 1995. He was back to his old self, trading leather with Ray Mercer. He even dropped his iron-chained opponent en route to a decision win. At that time, a 45-year-old George Foreman had wrestled the title away from McCallum Moore. The division was ripe for the picking. In 1995, Holyfield took on Riddick Bowe for a third meeting. It was another war, with both men hurt. Ultimately, the bigger Bowe prevailed and inflicted the first stoppage defeat of Holyfield's career. Holyfield returned in 1996 against former light heavyweight and cruiserweight champion Bobby Chiz and looked flat against his undersized opponent. At 34 years of age, Holyfield was considered to finish as a contender. At the time, Mike Tyson held the belt and was looking for a big money fight. The Holyfield fight would provide a payday against a big but beatable opponent and continue placing Tyson as a viable contender for the true crown. Holyfield was a resounding underdog against Tyson, to the point where many feared for his life. Instead, Holyfield turned back the clock, outfighting the bullish Tyson en route to an 11-round stoppage. Once again, Holyfield had resuscitated his career. A rematch took place later that year, and Holyfield's headbutts drove Tyson insane, leading the challenger to bite part of Holyfield's ear off. Holyfield capped off the year by gaining revenge over McCallum Moore in an entertaining fight. With the victory, Holyfield had taken Moore's belt and was one strap away from being the linear two-time heavyweight champion. Despite holding a belt and being on a 6-fight winning streak, Lewis had yet to gain the adulation bestowed to Holyfield, but he remained close to gaining the lineal championship. Entering 1998, Lewis took on the heavy-punching Shannon Briggs. Lewis suffered a scare early on and was forced to regroup before halting Briggs in the 5th round. Lewis would later claim he'd been unprepared for the bout. Had the Brit learned from his upset loss to McCall? Then, he ended the year by defending his title against the unknown Zeljko Mavrovic. Lewis dominated the bout, but was unable to hurt his inexperienced foe. Holyfield, meanwhile, defended his titles against Von Bean. The champion delivered a flat performance and failed to stop his opponent. Perhaps fearful of incurring upset defeats, both Lewis and Holyfield finally agreed to fight. The bout would take place on March 1999. For the first time in years, boxing would finally have an undisputed heavyweight champion. Lewis trained diligently, but he still suffered from reluctance, something Emanuel Stewart attempted to curtail.
But you need to throw the left hook more. I keep telling you, you're concentrating on a 1-2, and your man is fighting you from here. Let it go. You hesitate too much. You gotta let shots go. You hold it up too much.
Holyfield, meanwhile, despite being older at 36 years of age, was the more familiar commodity. As such, he entered the bout as a slight favorite. On fight night, however, the odds evened up. Despite giving away 31 pounds in weight, Holyfield appeared supremely confident. He was also adamant about prophesizing a 3rd-round stoppage, stating, "I'm still holding to the truth. The truth is, I'm gonna knock him out in the 3rd round." The bout would take place at the legendary Madison Square Garden, the location of Frazier Ali 1, considered one of the best heavyweight fights ever. After 11 years of waiting, Lewis started off quickly. With his protector reaching his armpits, Lewis displayed his laser-like jab and kept Holyfield at bay. But he was also clinching, something Holyfield failed to appreciate. Lewis unleashed his power in the second, and then proceeded to dominate Holyfield. In the third, Lewis continued firing his long-range offense, but Holyfield, powered by his pre-fight visions, upped the pace. Finally, the fans received what they wanted. But for Holyfield, the prophecy faltered. In the fourth, Lewis continued staying out of range, and Holyfield looked deflated. In the fifth, Lewis outclassed Holyfield, and one wondered whether the American would hear the final bell. Surprised by his own success, Lewis grew overconfident in the sixth, and Holyfield pounced. Within minutes, however, Lewis reasserted control. Round after round, Lewis maintained a perfect range, snapping Holyfield's head around. By this time, Holyfield was a seasoned veteran, and he succeeded in deflecting much of Lewis's heavy artillery. But whereas Riddick Bowe had constantly slugged it out with Holyfield, Lewis used his size and reach to pile up points, refusing an all-out war. Needing a miracle, Holyfield rallied his energy in the 10th, and the battle intensified. Lewis reasserted control in the 11th, but Holyfield kept coming. With victory in his grasp, Lewis boxed beautifully. The decision was expected merely as a formality. But then...
Judge at ringside, Larry O'Connell scores the bout 115 to 115, even a draw. Both champions retain their belts.
It was bad enough for Judge Larry O'Connell to score the bout a draw when Lewis had clearly won. But Judge Eugenia Williams' incompetence overshadowed his when she scored the bout 115-113 for Holyfield. Lewis was astounded.
You gotta go check those scores, man. That's fucking up. What shot they hit me with? What? Nothing. Bullshit.
No, worried about a riot.
I'm a fucking champion in here.
Holyfield, meanwhile, remained coy.
Were you surprised to get the draw?
It's real simple. The people around the ring is not the judge. You know, things happen to me sometimes like that. That's just the way it flows. You know, it's always the next time.
Emmanuel Stewart was despondent, saying he, Lewis, controlled the fight. It wasn't even close. This is what's killing boxing. Don Turner, Holyfield's trainer, disagreed, saying, I thought we won the last 4 rounds to win the fight. But it was close. It was definitely close. Holyfield's promoter, the infamous Don King, merely bellowed, let's do it again. On the grandest stage, boxing had shown its ugly side.
Outraged boxing fans were convinced the fix was in Saturday night as Lennox Lewis completely overwhelmed Evander Holyfield but came away with only a draw.
This is an embarrassment to boxing in general.
Lewis was master of the jab, while Holyfield spent the evening delivering powerful blows to Lewis's right hand with his face.
And Don King was at the center of it all.
Don King has got too much to do in boxing, and the sooner they get rid of Don King, the better.
Promoter Don King explained the controversial decision, declaring, quote, saying what it should be does not say what it was and what it was supposed to be.
But King, the ultimate hustler, refused to shy from the cameras.
Do you think he won the fight?
I would not second guess the
No, it's an opinion. Do you think he won it?
My opinion is meaning. All I can do is accept what the judges have said.
Who won the fight on Saturday night?
And you have guys on both sides of the aisle arguing that their respective person won. Some for Lennox Lewis, they say Lennox won. Some of them think that Holyfield won. And so you have it where it's a draw. You have several that says a draw. Dave Anderson of the New York Times says it was a draw. The chairman of the board of USSB, Stanley Hubbard, he had said it was a draw. Colin Hart, one of the most respected writers in London, said it was a draw.
Well, you have a very unpopular decision, but not a corrupt decision. And this is the distinction between what is happening.
Did Don King think it was a draw?
Don King accepts the decision of the judges.
I know that, but just tell me, did Don King...
Well, you know,
you've seen a lot of fights. You've promoted a lot of fights. You've promoted fights with all these heavyweight champions. You know something about the sport of boxing. Who won the fight?
Charles, let me tell you, at a fight that has not too many people, I would be able to give you an intelligent answer because I wouldn't have nothing else to do but to peer at the fight.
Right.
But with a fight with the magnetism of that fight Saturday night, with the electricity, with 21,000 people, with Jack Nicholson and Michael Douglas, I didn't have time, and I was sitting there.
You were taking care of them and not watching the fight?
What chance of the rematch happening in Britain?
There's always an opportunity for it to happen in the great UK because the UK is a beautiful place. It's got beautiful people, and I love the people of the UK.
I might have missed it, Don. I didn't get the answer. What chance of the rematch?
And like a true hustler, he even charmed his detractors.
You certainly come in for a lot of personal criticism. Why do you think that is?
I find myself being a controversial person because they can't figure out how I continue to succeed, and I continue to go as Churchill would do. He said, we will fight them on the beaches, we will fight them in the trenches, we will fight them in the air battles, but we shall never, never surrender. Victory is ours.
The inexperienced IBF judge, Eugenia Williams, was the focus of a New York State hearing. Forced to justify her decision, Williams said, I scored what I saw when I saw it. What I saw that night is not what the camera saw. They were at a different angle. Williams also blamed photographers and Lewis for obstructing her vision, thus preventing her from properly ascertaining the action. When asked whether she'd been bribed, Williams vehemently denied it. More tellingly, she admitted she would have scored round 5 for Lewis, which would have had him announced as the winner. Still, one wondered how she could continue to maintain that the bout had been close. In the end, a rematch remained the only logical route. This time in Las Vegas, Holyfield started quickly. Lewis tried a big right hand, but Holyfield was tenacious. In the second, Lewis fired his jab. By the third, the bout was looking like a repeat of the first bout, but Holyfield appeared fresher. Lewis kept Holyfield at bay, and the clinching prevented the American from scoring inside. In the fifth, Holyfield reached for his classic weapon, the headbutt. Lewis ate another headbutt in the sixth, and though Lewis had won the round, it also slowed down, much to Stewart's consternation.
But you just cut off completely. It's the same way you lost some other one and get your ass in trouble on the damn scorecard because you're not fighting. You're waiting too damn much. All right. Let the shots go.
Lewis heeded the advice, but the approach backfired as Holyfield stunned him. Holyfield went for the kill and threw in a headbutt for good measure. Lewis tried stealing the round, but ate another bomb. Lewis re-established distance in the eighth. Knowing he could hurt Lewis, Holyfield rallied in the ninth, and the two men traded. In the 10th, Holyfield was surprisingly competitive by using his jab. A tired Lewis picked the pace up in the 11th. With all the titles on the line, both men finished strongly. And Holyfield just couldn't abandon the headbutting. Lewis must have been nervous. What would he receive in what had turned to be a surprisingly tougher rematch?
Lennox Lewis!
Lewis was now the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. The stain from the first fight washed away. But as soon as Lewis had collected all the belts, the WBA stripped him of the title. But despite what any strap said, Lewis remained the division's true king. Holyfield would then face John Ruiz, another Don King fighter, for the belt. As for Lewis, he would go on to face America's next hope. But these are tales for another time. For decades, the tiny island of Puerto Rico has produced a wealth of talent. Despite a population the fraction of the United States and Mexico, Puerto Rico has consistently rivaled those two nations. And if there's a Boricuan Mount Rushmore, then Felix Tito Trinidad is sure to be on it. Turning pro at 17, the lanky Trinidad captured a welterweight title at the age of 20 when he stopped the more experienced Maurice Blocker in the second round. Trinidad defended his title 16 times, including a decision over fellow Puerto Rican Hector Camacho. Trinidad then beat the undefeated heavy-handed Yori Boy Campos. Trinidad tasted the canvas early, but returned to brutally hold the Mexican. He then fought another undefeated boxer in the form of Oba Carr. Again, Trinidad tasted the canvas, but returned to abuse Carr, stopping him in the 8th round. But at that time, during the mid-1990s, Trinidad was with Don King, who was exiled on Showtime, then second place to the home of boxing, HBO. Trinidad yearned for fights against Julio Cesar Chavez and Terry Norris, but was relegated to fighting on undercards. Finally, in 1999, he made his way to HBO and took on the wily Pernell Whitaker. After winning gold at the 1984 Olympics, Whitaker turned pro that same year. He lost his first bid at a lightweight title in a highly controversial defeat against the Iron Chin, Jose Luis Ramirez. But Whitaker would bounce back by decisioning him in a rematch. At 135 pounds, Whitaker collected all 3 belts and beat fighters such as Greg Haugen, Jorge Paez, Freddie Pendleton, and the great Azuma Nelson. And with his superb defensive abilities, he made it look easy. He then moved up to 140 pounds and grabbed the title from Rafael Pineda. He did the same at 147 in a tough outing against Buddy McGirt. Then, in 1993, the undefeated Julio Cesar Chavez moved up to welterweight and challenged Whitaker for pound-for-pound supremacy. Whitaker surged ahead in the latter half of the fight, but was awarded a dubious draw. The American followed it up with another win over McGirt, and then won another title at 154 pounds. By the mid-1990s, he was considered the best boxer on the planet, but he was too dominant, and he failed to achieve superstardom. In 1996, he had 2 tough outings against the undefeated Wilfredo Rivera. Then, uncharacteristically, he was forced to rally from behind to stop the Cuban Diosbelis Hurtado. The win finally secured him a shot at boxer's cash cow, the undefeated Oscar De La Hoya. The bout was closely contested, and at times, the older Whitaker made the Golden Boy look foolish. But De La Hoya landed the flashier shots and appeared to inflict more damage. In the end, Whitaker lost a unanimous decision, though again, some felt he'd won the bout. There was talk of a rematch, but Bob Arum, De La Hoya's promoter, pursued other avenues. Whitaker, meanwhile, took on Andrei Pestriayev in a title eliminator for I Cortez Championship. Whitaker beat the Russian, but a positive drug test reversed it to a no contest. The Cortez fight proceeded, but a second positive drug test for Whitaker cancelled the bout. By then, Whitaker's lifestyle proved a nuisance, but he remained steadfast in fighting the best and signed on to fight the power-punching Felix Trinidad.
All great careers come to an end. This could be the end for Pernell Whitaker. A lot of people were up in arms because I'd mentioned that by the time Roberto Duran was Pernell Whitaker's age, he'd lost not only to Benitez and Hearns, but to Kirkland Lang. And they said, Max, that wasn't the real Roberto Duran who lost to Kirkland Lang, and I agree, it wasn't. But you know what? That wasn't the real Pernell Whitaker who I had beating Oscar De La Hoya. That's how great Pernell Whitaker is. I've never seen him lose a fight, but there's a first time for everything. Whitaker's is used to this situation. He's been in so many big fights. Sure, you know, you look down the line, Azuma Nelson, Buddy McGirt, Julio Cesar Chavez, Oscar De La Hoya. Really, the only guys Trinidad has fought: a washed-up Maurice Blocker, a limited Yori Boy Campos, and a small and also, in certain respects, limited Oba Carr. He's never been in there with anyone like Pernell Whitaker.
Fighting in Trinidad's adopted hometown of New York City, the shorter Whitaker fought aggressively. Trinidad held his own, landing jabs and some power shots. It was a close round and a good start for the older Whitaker. Whitaker upped the aggression in the second and tried smothering the taller Trinidad while working the body. But Trinidad put a halt to it. Whitaker crowded Trinidad and made it out the round. The third started with a war of jabs. But soon, Whitaker was back at pressuring. Whitaker's most effective weapon remained his jab, but he was being hit more than usual. Meanwhile, Trinidad sniped from the outside, and his shots stunned Whitaker. Whitaker remained brave, but he was outgunned against a younger and bigger Trinidad. Whitaker showed flashes of his old wizardry, but the magic was running low. Trinidad's accuracy and pressure wore Whitaker down. And the old lion was forced to sit on the canvas. The referee failed to score a knockdown. Trinidad dominated the 11th, while Whitaker tried to buy time. Whitaker's corner informed him a knockout was required, but Whitaker remained on the retreat. And once again, he found himself cornered. Trinidad emerged victorious by wide unanimous decision. And Whitaker's saving grace was that he'd gone the distance while suffering from a fractured jaw. But he was too proud to concede defeat.
You guys have been waiting to see Pernell Whitaker lose for 18 years, and he still hasn't lost.
Some debated how much credit Trinidad deserved for beating a 35-year-old who'd been inactive for over a year. Others pointed to Trinidad's own 10-month layoff, as well as his troubles making weight. In the end, Trinidad had become the first man to dominate the wily Whitaker. Whitaker remained idle for 2 years before returning against journeyman Carlos Bojorquez. The inactivity, however, weakened his body and he fractured his clavicle after throwing a punch. He was unable to continue and suffered a TKO defeat. Whitaker finally retired at the age of 37. But then, he suffered from seizures after the bout, which he blamed on a mixture of alcohol and pain medication. In 2002, he continued dabbling with drugs. But later in the mid-2000s, he began training professional boxers and appeared to sober up. Unfortunately, in 2019, he was struck by a vehicle and died. Today, he is considered one of the top 5 lightweights of all time, as well as one of the best fighters ever. Trinidad, meanwhile, scored another win before fighting fellow undefeated kingpin Oscar De La Hoya. At the time, the bout was the highest-grossing pay-per-view ever, and Trinidad snuck away with a highly controversial decision. He later moved up to 154 and scored 2 exciting wins over the younger David Reed and Fernando Vargas, unifying the division. Then, he won another title at middleweight against William Joppy, but his rampage was finally repelled by titleist Bernard Hopkins. Trinidad retired after a farewell bout in 2002, but returned 2 years later against former welterweight champion Ricardo Mayorga. He suffered a one-sided decision loss against Turtle Shell master Winky Wright and retired again. In 2008, an ill-advised comeback at 175 pounds occurred when he took on Roy Jones Jr. in a battle of faded stars. Having been inactive for over 2 years and fighting well above his best weight, Trinidad tried his best, but Jones soundly defeated him, finally retiring him for good. Today, he is considered the best Puerto Rican boxer of all time and one of the biggest punchers ever. Controversial decisions always stir the boxing world, but when one such verdict involves both the heavyweight crown as well as a world record, the stirring grows strong. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, Michael Spinks made history early in his life when he joined the legendary 1976 U.S. Olympic team. The squad included such fighters as Howard Davis, Leo Randolph, Charles Mooney, and Sugar Ray Leonard. Michael, along with his brother Leon, both snatched gold at the Olympics. But contrary to his more carefree brother, Michael had little ambition for the pro ranks. While Leon, then seen as a more promising fighter when pro, Michael remained content working at a Holiday Inn. Butch Lewis, a former used car salesman who had established himself in the boxing world, badgered him daily with a contract. Michael remained steadfast, happy with his job and his gold medal. But when he switched employment to a Monsanto chemical plant, a mind shift occurred. Unwilling to waft in chemical fumes and wanting to be his own boss, Spinks accepted Lewis's offer. Fighting as a light heavyweight, Spinks turned pro in 1977. A year later, his brother Leon pulled an upset by defeating Muhammad Ali for the heavyweight championship. Spurred on by his brother's success, Michael piled on the wins and defeated top men such as Yaki Lopez and Marvin Johnson. His first title shot came in 1981 when he took on the tough Eddie Mustafa Mohamed. It was a rough outing, but Spinks showed he was more than an amateur star, going the full 15 rounds, and earned a unanimous decision. Spinks tallied 5 defenses before taking on another tough pressure fighter, Dwight Muhammad Qawi. It proved another grueling bout, but Spinks displayed his best qualities: refined technique, straight shots, and impeccable conditioning. The win earned him another light heavyweight title. By 1983, he was the only boxer from the illustrious 1976 Olympic team to still hold a title. Then, in 1984, he added the last belt to his collection as he won the newly created IBF title by defeating Eddie Davis. Spinks was the undisputed light heavyweight champion, but in the 1980s, the moniker meant little, as the weight class was considered a half-baked heavyweight division. If Spinks wanted to shine, he would have to make a trek many before him had tried and failed at: a move to the heavyweight ranks. This would entail dethroning a man who'd reigned for 7 years. Born in Cuthbert, Georgia, Larry Holmes moved to eastern Pennsylvania early in his life. He took to boxing in his late teens and quickly found a knack for the sport. He made his bones as a sparring partner for Muhammad Ali during the early 1970s, but Holmes remained under the radar as an amateur. He finally received some recognition in 1973, but for all the wrong reasons. He took on the heralded Dwayne Bobbick at the Olympic box office and was dropped in the first round. In the third, Holmes was disqualified for clinching. The fight would mar Holmes' image and portrayed him as a scared fighter. On the third, Holmes continued sparring with Ali and turned pro in 1973. Despite signing with Don King, Holmes remained an obscure prospect, but he was already showing what would become one of the best jabs ever. In 1978, he took on the murderous punching Ernie Shavers. Holmes walked away with a 12-round unanimous decision and earned a shot at a portion of the heavyweight crown. This would come against Ken Norton. Norton was a savvy veteran who held a win over Muhammad Ali and had dropped 2 highly controversial decisions to the greatest. Holmes and Norton waged the war, culminating in one of the best rounds ever in the 15th. Holmes walked away with a win and the title. He notched more defenses, including rising from the canvas in a rematch against Shavers. Despite his vulnerability, Holmes seemed unable to capture the public's imagination. A chance to do that came in 1980, when Holmes signed to fight his former employer, Muhammad Ali. By the late 1970s, Ali was a shell of his former self. The wars and lack of discipline had caught up to him. In 1978, Ali lost the title to a prospect in Leon Spinks. A year later, Ali whipped himself up into the best shape possible and became a 3-time world champion by defeating Spinks. Ali announced his retirement, but returned 2 years later, in part due to financial struggles. As usual, the former champion talked a good game, but despite any narratives of the lineal championship being on the line, many questioned about its legitimacy, as rumors already circulated regarding Ali's fragile health. 3 months before the bout, the Nevada State Athletic Commission ordered Ali to undergo supplemental testing. The examination took place at the prestigious Mayo Clinic, which gave Ali a clean bill of health. The Holmes-Ali bout, however, turned into an abomination as Ali had nothing left. Holmes held back his attack, but still delivered a frightful beating. Ali's corner stopped the bout in the 10th. What was supposed to be a passing of the torch only earned Holmes more skepticism. For many, he'd beaten a shot fighter, and a beloved one at that. Still, Holmes was recognized as the true heavyweight champion and continued being his consistently successful self. The biggest event came against contender Jerry Cooney in 1983, in a bout hyped largely on racial division. Holmes once again proved resilient, as he overcame adversity to stop a bigger opponent. But he remained under Ali's shadow, failing to capture the same adulation as his predecessors. Some of this, however, could be blamed on him. In 1983, Boston reporter Steve Marantz wrote about Holmes' penchant for making everything racial during disputes. In the article, insiders spoke about Holmes' harsh treatment of sparring partners and of the aging legendary trainer, Ray Arcel. Moreover, he detailed Holmes' refusal to cooperate with the media, such as acting like a diva during photo shoots or simply walking out of them. Still, by 1985, Holmes had been champion for 7 years and had notched 21 defenses. Now, along came Michael Spinks. By most accounts, Spinks had an undying loyalty to his promoter, the eccentric Butch Lewis. It was Lewis who masterminded a move to heavyweight, as he was confident Holmes' time was up. Holmes' promoter Don King and Butch Lewis pitched a Holmes-Spinks fight to HBO. The executives knew Holmes had run out of competent names to fight. Moreover, they smelled the surrounding narratives useful for a big promotion. And before long, a fight between Holmes and Spinks was signed. But there was more to the bout than just the heavyweight crown. As Holmes piled on the victories, he neared Joe Louis's record of 25 defenses. But there was another record at stake. Back in the 1950s, heavyweight champion Rocky Marciano retired with a record of 49-0. The title is still in his hands. Now, Holmes, 48-0, was on the cusp of matching it. For Michael Spinks, the challenge laid in achieving what the historical record claimed was unlikely, to win the heavyweight crown while being the reigning light heavyweight king. Qualified men such as Billy Conn, Archie Moore, and Bob Foster had tried and failed. On top of this, if Michael proved successful, he and Leon would become the first pair of brothers to have won the heavyweight crown. But there was more at stake than just setting records. It was about settling a score. Back in 1981, Holmes had defended his title against Leon. Holmes disliked Leon for his unprofessionalism and wild lifestyle. The friction intensified during a function for Joe Louis. There, an inebriated Spinks caused a scene, which got too close to Holmes' wife. From that day, Holmes desired to punish Leon. He got his chance in 1981 and pummeled Spinks before halting him in the third round. Michael was ringside, his face covered in tears. Now, he would get his chance at revenge. For Spinks, the move was uncharacteristic. Compared to his brother Leon, Michael was a more reserved fighter, as proven by his reluctance to turn professional. Moreover, he disliked the actual aspect of fighting and claimed that a boxer's lifestyle was a lonely endeavor. But he was the rare fighter who, despite his lack of love for combat, took it seriously. And contrary to his brother, Michael remained diligently disciplined. On top of this, he had a secret weapon in his camp. Former football player Mikey Shilstone had been working with Michael for 3 years as his strength and conditioning coach. Now, the trainer focused on creating a lean fighting machine. According to Spinks, he'd sparred heavyweights before and had discovered that he could hurt them. He'd sparred one of the most durable heavyweights ever in Randall Tex Cobb and moved him with his shots. So power wasn't the problem. What Spinks worried about was absorbing it. This is where Shilstone came in. Using methods previously unseen in boxing, Shilstone packed muscle onto Spinks' 6 feet 2.5 inch frame. The aim, he claimed, was to get Spinks into the ring at his walk-around weight, except with the excess weight composed of muscle. Moreover, he conditioned him to fight in bursts, which would allow for ambush tactics and guerrilla warfare. Holmes, for his part, appeared aloof. In public, Holmes undermined Spinks' chances. But this was a 35-year-old man with many miles on his odometer. 2 years earlier, Holmes had encountered a tougher-than-expected test against Tim Witherspoon. In 1985, after his stoppage win over David Bay, Holmes had said, "No more big guys." Still, he did fight big guys. In his last bout, Holmes had struggled against Carl the Truth Williams to emerge with a close decision win. There was also outside-the-ring drama involving the sanctioning bodies. The WBC organization had wanted Holmes to defend against Greg Page, but Holmes had been offered more money to fight Joe Frazier's son, Marvis. And so, Holmes dumped the WBC belt and validated the recently created IBF title by accepting their offer. At around this time, Holmes had also begun talking about retirement. Was he still the Eastern Assassin? The experts and writers seemed to think so, and few gave Spinks a chance. Billy Conn, the light heavyweight who'd failed to beat Joe Louis, infamously said of Spinks, "The guy has no chance. Not because of the weight difference, but because he's just not that good a fighter. Who has he fought? Nothing but a bunch of bums." LA Times writer Jim Murray expected Holmes to be too big and prophesied a murder by saying, "Bring a priest." Writer Michael Katz bluntly said, "Spinks can't win." And the Baltimore Sun's Mike Litwin said, "Light heavies don't beat heavyweights. Ever." Adding to the drama was the presence of Rocky Marciano's brother and children, who'd been brought by the Riviera to witness a historic event. On fight night, Holmes' legendary jab was on display. Spinks seemed unable to halt it, but returned fire. Spinks then uncorked his own jab, and he moved when he had to. Spinks managed to cut the distance on the taller man and grew stronger. The fight was mainly fought in the center of the ring. Holmes appeared comfortable snapping his jab, but Spinks was landing the power punches. By the sixth, it was clear that Holmes' jab alone wouldn't get the job done.
Now it's a jabbing contest, and Spinks appears to be winning.
Spinks' energetic burst swayed the crowd. Holmes landed his jab, but his body shots appeared the heaviest blows of the fight. Still, he continued fighting as if he lacked a size advantage. By the 10th, it appears as if Shieldstone's conditioning paid off, as Spinks exploded and then rested while avoiding the big stuff. Both men continued jabbing, but Spinks added to it with high theatrics.
I don't know why Larry's not taking the pass. I don't know why Larry's not going to the body. He's right there.
Holmes finally tried crowding Spinks in the 13th, and Holmes seemed content to wait for one big right hand. People waited for Holmes to pull out a Joe Louis, but the moment never came. Spinks pulled out a unanimous decision and became the heavyweight champion. Muhammad Ali would later say, "All light heavyweights can lift their hands up now. No more second-class citizenship." Spinks would later appear on a show the following day and crumbled onto a sofa as soon as the segment ended. His body was battered. Meanwhile, Holmes' ego was equally bruised. During the post-fight press conference, Holmes, who alleged to have seen the Marcianos celebrating his loss, exploded.
Not knowing anything about Rocky, not trying to put him down, but I would, and it's so easy for me to do it. He was 25 years old fighting old men. I can easily put him down. Really want to get technical about the whole thing. Rocky couldn't carry my jockstrap. There would never be a white champion as long as black fighters fighting the way they are. You can go back to Boston and wherever you come from with Steve Morantz and all the other people in Boston that I think is all racist and shove Boston up your ass.
After his racially charged tirade, Holmes caught himself and tried to mend fences.
Let me explain to you all what I said about Rocky. I think your brother was a great fighter, and then I'm sorry if you took that out of the wrong context.
Peter Marciano admitted being glad his brother's record remained intact and held no ill will towards Holmes. For years afterwards, Holmes' post-fight comments would hover over him like a dark cloud. He would later say, "I said things to Peter Marciano and Rocky's kids that were uncalled for and simply wrong. Somewhere in there I must have realized I'd gone too far, because, in my fashion, I tried to apologize. But of course, it was too little, too late." In a 2008 Ring magazine interview, Holmes would further clarify that, at the time of the Spinks fight, he had a fighter's mentality, and that his comments about Marciano applied to all fighters, whether past or present. No fighter could rival him. If he didn't believe that, he said, he would have never been champion. In the end, Spinks and Holmes did it again in 1986. Once again, it was a hotly contested affair. This time, however, many felt Holmes had done enough to regain his title. The judges disagreed. Holmes would later accuse the IBF and Butch Lewis, Spinks' promoter, of conspiring against him. And immediately after the bout, Holmes voiced his displeasure.
And I can say to the judges, the referees, the promoters, the kids where the sun don't shine. And since we're on HBO, that's my big black behind.
Spinks, meanwhile, signed up to HBO's innovative heavyweight tournament. Despite being considered the heavyweight king, Spinks only held one belt, and the aim was to unite them all. However, Spinks and his team caught wind of a potential big money fight with Jerry Cooney. As the IBF champion, Spinks was beholden to the series, but the loophole was that he could drop out if he relinquished the belt. He did just that and proceeded to stop Cooney in 1987. But HBO struck gold when they signed a young man by the name of Mike Tyson into their series. Tyson was a wildfire, fast and devastating, and he easily ransacked the series, adding all 3 major belts to his collection. Holmes, who had retired after the Spinks fights, was lured out to fight Tyson for a $3 million payday. Tyson was too much for the aging veteran. And though Holmes attributed the loss to the last-minute nature of the fight, he expressed no regrets as he'd been content with the payday. Spinks would later fight Tyson, but just as Holmes had tarnished his image with his comments after their fight, Spinks' performance against Tyson would sully his, as he was stopped in less than a round. With time, however, both Spinks and Holmes' careers have been reevaluated. Spinks' accomplishments of being the undisputed light heavyweight and heavyweight champion remained virtually unchallenged. The only man close to doing so was the ultra-talented Roy Jones Jr. in 2003, but he never beat the true king, Lennox Lewis. Tyson, for his part, has defended Spinks, saying, "Michael Spinks got a bad break in life. He has legendary victories under his belt, but his legacy is being beaten by me in 91 seconds. That's not fair at all. He beat Larry Holmes twice, he beat Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, and he beat Pacquaio. He just got a bad break." Holmes, meanwhile, is now recognized as one of the best heavyweights ever, and his long reign has grown to be respected. The world of boxing is a monolithic institution. It's an industry rife with paradigms. Similarly, many boxers are unable to think outside the box. But sometimes, you have to go against the grain. In the early 2000s, Juan the Baby Bull Diaz was an undefeated lightweight titleist. With lightning-quick hands and an infinite gas tank, Diaz lived up to his name. He liked punching power, so he relied on drowning his opponents with offense, often throwing 100 punches per round. No fighter could keep up with him. In 2004, at 20 years old, Diaz captured a lightweight title against Lavka Sim. After 2 defenses, he fought the undefeated Jose Cotto. Cotto let the leather fly as he attempted to keep up with Diaz, but he went the same way of other Diaz opponents, losing a unanimous decision. After 2 more defenses, Diaz enjoyed a great 2007. First, he unified against the heavy-handed Acelino Freitas. Diaz abused Freitas and forced him to retire in the 8th round. Then, he added another title when he fought the veteran Julio Diaz. Once again, Juan Diaz's pace was too much for his opponent, and Julio was pulled out before the 9th round. Diaz had established himself as a force of nature, and there were plenty of delectable opponents at or near his division, such as Manny Pacquiao. Meanwhile, the 36-year-old Nate Campbell was in limbo. Having started boxing late in life, the talented Campbell racked up 23 straight wins. He lost his undefeated record in 2003 against the more experienced Joel Casamayor. The bout had been set up hastily, but Campbell performed well early before losing momentum. He walked away with a controversial defeat, but it made his mark. The following year, Campbell fought Australian contender Robbie Peaton. Campbell was in control, but surrendered the bout in one of the most bizarre ways ever. A year later, in 2005, Campbell rematched Peaton, but lost by 8th round stoppage. He dropped another fight immediately afterwards against gatekeeper Francisco Lorenzo. By then, Campbell had been boiling himself to make 130 pounds and decided to move to 135. In late 2005, he was matched with Almazbek Raimkulov, aka Kid Diamond. The undefeated Raimkulov had become a mythical gym figure after allegedly dropping welterweight champion Corey Spinks in sparring, as well as having roughed up Floyd Mayweather in the gym. But Campbell derailed the hype train, dishing out a beating before stopping Kid Diamond in the 10th. Campbell then took on South African strongman Isaac Shlaweyo. As in the Casamayor bout, Campbell started out quickly, but faltered later on and lost a split decision. He scored 3 straight wins, but going into the Diaz fight, Campbell was seen as an old, inconsistent boxer. A bad thing to be against a young whirlwind like Diaz. Still, Campbell was unimpressed with Diaz and asserted he'd beat the younger man. Campbell took the fight to Diaz. The two men went punch for punch. But the action led to a headbutt from Campbell, which caught Diaz. The second saw more of the same frantic action. Things slowed down slightly in the third, but then the action resumed. Campbell was playing Diaz's game. Many questioned the tactic. But one thing became apparent. Diaz was slapping or chopping with his shots, and Campbell was rolling and blocking most of them. Moreover, Campbell continually worked the body with sledgehammers and always returned fire. The action remained ferocious in the sixth. Then, Diaz's cut worsened. The referee deducted a point from Campbell for headbutting, and both men traded. A replay would later conclude that a punch had been the culprit behind the worsened cut. The seventh round proved a turning point. Diaz appeared bothered by the cut, but the bigger problem was Campbell, who was matching Diaz's output. Moreover, his punches were heavier than Diaz's slaps. Diaz remained game, but Campbell always took the play away from him. Fighting like a mini James Toney, Campbell stood in front of Diaz, whacking his body and head. It looked like things would be over in a tent. But Diaz smothered Campbell in the championship rounds and battled on. In the end, Campbell surpassed Diaz's output by throwing 1,145 punches to Diaz's 891, and he was awarded a split decision win. It had been one of the finest examples of beating a man at his own game. Diaz would rebound by beating fellow slugger Michael Katsidis. Then, in 2009, he gave the lineal lightweight champion Juan Manuel Marquez hell before being stopped in the 9th round. He then scored a controversial decision over Paulie Malignaggi before losing the rematch. Surprisingly, he was giving a second shot at Marquez in 2010, and though Diaz fought smarter, he still came up short, losing a decision. Diaz retired, but returned in 2013, scoring 7 victories before retiring for good in 2016. He now enjoys a life of activism as well as owning a trucking business. Campbell, meanwhile, signed to fight the talented John Guzman, but the fight was cancelled hours before the main event as Guzman suffered the after effects of a severe weight cut. Ironically, Campbell would fail to make weight in his next bout against Ali Funeka and was stripped of his titles. Campbell dropped Funeka early and late in the fight, but fought on fumes in between to eke out a majority decision. He later moved to 140 pounds and took on the undefeated Timothy Bradley. Campbell pulled out after a headbutt, and the bout was ruled a TKO loss, later reversed to a no contest. From there, Campbell became a stepping stone for younger fighters such as Victor Ortiz, Danny Garcia, and Kevin Bizier. He retired in 2014. Some boxers make the job difficult, and still they keep on winning. In 2001, the Russian-born Australian Kostya Tszyu didn't seem like a world beater. Tszyu had forged his reputation in the Russian amateur system. He was a decorated boxer, making his way to the 1988 Olympic Games. He capped off his amateur career by winning gold at the 1991 World Championships. Then, he moved to Australia and turned pro. Immediately, he displayed his methodical Soviet approach, combined with devastating punching power. After beating a series of old veterans, such as Juan Laporte and Livingstone Bramble, Tszyu lifted a junior welterweight belt by stopping Jake Rodriguez. He defended it 5 times, and by 1997, there was a buzz around him. There were even talks of a potential mega fight with the Golden Goose, Oscar de la Hoya. But first, Tszyu would have to get past contender Vince Phillips. Things went south for Tszyu, as the American proved unable to miss with his right hand. giving the Russian a taste of his own medicine. And in the 10th round, Phillips pulled off one of the biggest upsets ever. It seemed as if Tszyu was just another overhyped foreigner, a big puncher who could dish it out, but couldn't take it back. Tszyu, however, dusted himself off and scored stoppages over Calvin Grove and former champion Rafael Ruelas. By 1998, the De La Hoya payday vaporized when the Golden Boy established himself as a welterweight champion, but Tszyu remained steadfast in becoming the division's king. That year, he took on the wiry Dios Bellis Hurtado. A year earlier, Hurtado had given the legendary Pernell Whitaker hell, surging ahead in the cards before the light-punching Whitaker stopped him late in the bout. Against Tszyu, Hurtado hit the deck early, but he returned the favor twofold. A repeat of the Phillips bout appeared imminent, but Tszyu continued walking Hurtado down and scored a 6-round stoppage. Once again, a tall boxer had managed to reach Tszyu, and though the Russian had emerged victorious, many saw a second defeat looming. Tszyu spent the next 2 years grabbing a belt by defeating Miguel Angel Gonzalez, and then by beating a past his prime Julio Cesar Chavez. Finally, in 2001, Tszyu signed up to fight fellow title holder Sharon Bay Mitchell. The quick-fisted Mitchell traded with Tszyu during a tense and sloppy boxing match. In the end, Mitchell retired from the bout after suffering a knee injury. Tszyu stayed busy by decisioning the undefeated Otkay Urkel. Tszyu failed to stop his opponent, and the unknown Urkel provided a stiff test. This led some to believe that Tszyu was a solid boxer, though unimpressive without his power. Few experts gave him a chance to win against the undefeated Zab Judah. Hailing from Brooklyn, New York, Judah possessed all the tools necessary to impress crowds, such as lightning-quick hands and concussive power. He demonstrated all these perks in grabbing a vacant title against Jean-Pierre Bergman. He subsequently flashed his talent by defending his title 5 times. Despite Judah's subpar opposition, he was anointed as boxing's next star, and he mingled with fistic royalty such as Mike Tyson and Pernell Whitaker. For many, not only did Judah rival Tszyu's power, but he possessed the faster hands as well. Thus, Judah was expected to be the quicker gunslinger, and the image of Tszyu being raked by Vince Phillips' right hands remained fresh in people's memories. How would he handle Judah's laser-like shots? On fight week, one man who gave Tszyu no chance was Judah's biggest fan, pundit Max Kellerman. On fight week, Kellerman said Tszyu was an overrated puncher and excluded him from the top 10 pound-for-pound list. In hindsight, Judah's flash obscured his own flaws. Against the durable journeyman Mickey Ward, Judah's power appeared non-existent. Like Tszyu, Ward was a tough, strong, and rugged boxer. Moreover, Judah had tasted the canvas against Jean-Pierre Bergman and Teron Millette. Few people, however, questioned his chin. On top of all this, reporter Steve Kim would later report that Judah and his entourage were too worried about outside-the-ring details, such as limousines and hotel arrangements. And so, Tszyu entered the fight as a 2.5-to-1 underdog. On fight night, Judah arrived confident, and he even brought along Mike Tyson to witness a coronation. In the first round, Judah proved the pundits correct.
The early stages of the fight will be pivotal. He's nailing Tszyu here. Tszyu holding on. And rolling away with a left hook. Continues to hit.
In the second, Judah backed off. He appeared to be taking his time, but deep into the round, it seemed as if Tszyu's aggressive stance had confused him. Then, the Russian struck.
An ending strike! Down he goes! A right hand, he's in trouble! He's in real trouble! It's over!
Tszyu was overjoyed, but Judah failed to share the sentiment.
Time, again, coming forward, because Tszyu has the power. Oh, look at this, this is no good. Taking a glove to the neck of Jay Nady.
The Nevada State Athletic Commission would suspend Judah for a year and fine him $100,000. Some criticized the referee Jay Nady's decision, but he maintained that Judah's reaction to the punch had demonstrated the boxer's inability to defend from the incoming barrage. The stoppage, however, occurred when there was no time left in the round, meaning Judah could have recuperated during the 1 minute of rest. And despite being a self-professed judo acolyte, Max Kellerman raised a salient point that Jay Nady had once allowed Tito Trinidad to tee off on Fernando Vargas multiple times before finally halting the bout. And yet here Nady failed to give Judah the same opportunity so early in the bout. In the end, the controversy warranted a rematch, but Tszyu recalled Judah's earlier words.
Will you give him a rematch?
Do you remember in the press conference we asked the same questions to him? Winner take all.
Showtime executives disagreed, and after the drama, they saw big potential in a rematch. Unfortunately, a second meeting failed to materialize. 4 years later, Judah would redeem himself. And Tszyu still had more in the tank. But those are all tales for another time.
You are watching BDA Boxing. If you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
The Panamanian Roberto Duran is considered to be, at worst, one of the top 20 boxers of all time. As well as one of the top 3 lightweights ever. He won titles across 135 to 160 pounds. But there is one controversy that plagues the 4-division world champion, and we're not talking about the no-mass fight. Crawling his way out of poverty, Duran turned pro in 1968 at the age of 16. With a marauding take-no-prisoners style, Duran was a ferocious fighter. In the process, he defeated former super featherweight champion Hiroshi Kobayashi and future featherweight titleist Ernesto Marcel. By the early 1970s, Duran had notched 28 wins, 11 of those ending in the first round. But was he more than a puncher? The test would come against Scotland's Ken Buchanan. Having turned pro at the age of 20, Buchanan was a smooth boxer with a sharp jab. His only blemish in the first 5 years was a close decision loss against Miguel Velasquez, which, by most accounts, should have gone to Buchanan. 9 months later, Buchanan traveled to humid Puerto Rico and challenged the champion Ismael Laguna. Buchanan was highly motivated after having been told Laguna considered him a soft touch. Battling a slick fighter, along with the scorching heat, the underdog Buchanan decisioned the wily Laguna. Afterwards, Buchanan sprinkled in some non-title bouts, but he also unified by stopping Ruben Navarro and defended against Laguna in a New York rematch. The first utterances of a Buchanan-Duran bout occurred in 1971, when Duran, fighting on the undercard of Buchanan-Laguna 2, stopped Benny Huertas in the first round. Then, in June 1972, Buchanan and Duran signed on for a bout. Duran took offense to Buchanan's comment that he would easily outbox him, and with the legendary Ray Arcel as a co-trainer, Duran was ready for war. But the bettors agreed with Buchanan, and they made the Scot a 2-1 favorite. Duran started like a rabid dog, scoring a knockdown. Buchanan uncorked his jab and almost dropped Duran. But the Panamanian kept coming. Buchanan started the second by darting around the ring, but Duran stuck to him like glue. Clearly, this was a battle of attrition. Could Duran sustain the pace? Time after time, Duran ravaged Buchanan with power shots. In the fourth, the Scot landed a body shot, but Duran returned fire. Duran continued the onslaught. In the ninth, Buchanan found his second wind and scored his shots, but Duran maintained the barbaric pace. Buchanan fought hard in the 12th, and the two men traded. The 13th unfolded like the rest, with Duran fighting like a man possessed. But then, both men traded at the bell. Duran landed a low blow, but the referee failed to see it. Buchanan stayed down, and the referee stopped the fight in favor of the new champion, Roberto Duran. Buchanan's team complained, but the decision had been set. Days later, referee Johnny Lobianco rewatched the fight and admitted the punch had been low. Then again, Buchanan had been holding Duran behind the head, He'd done the same during the final exchange, which might have caused Duran's punch to stray low. For some, the stoppage had been inconsequential, as all three judges had Duran generously ahead. Still, it had been an indignant end to a title run, and Duran agreed to a rematch. Buchanan would later say he walked away with swollen testicles and accused Duran of being a dirty fighter. Unfortunately, the rematch failed to materialize. Some blamed Duran for evading the rematch, but the Panamanian notched 3 non-title bouts that very year, which included an upset defeat to Esteban DeJesus. Afterwards, Duran was determined to avenge the loss, which he did in 1974. This might have swayed him away from a Buchanan rematch. Buchanan, meanwhile, notched 13 straight wins in a span of 30 months as he hunted Duran. He managed to become the first and only man to stop Carlos Ortiz, and also defeated fellow countryman Jim Watt. But he later succumbed to an eye injury and lost the championship bout to Guts Ishimaru. By then, the cantankerous Buchanan had fallen out with various managers and trainers. This, along with his inability to secure the Duran rematch, led to a retirement. Financial difficulty forced him to return in 1979, but he delivered uneven performances, losing 5 out of 9 fights. Years later, Buchanan rebounded by earning a spot in the Hall of Fame. He also released an autobiography and became a media personality before passing away in April 2023. Duran, meanwhile, was just getting started. And despite a relatively short career, Vicente Saldivar is considered one of the finest featherweights of all time. So, how did he become one of the best Mexican fighters in history? His famous comeback. Born in 1943, Saldivar turned pro in 1961. A southpaw, the 5'6" tall Saldivar could apply debilitating pressure or box from the outside, gradually breaking his opponent down. By 1964, Saldivar had cultivated a record of 25 wins, 1 loss, and 20 knockouts. The lone defeat came via disqualification against Baby Luis, although some sources listed as a TKO defeat. In any event, Saldivar avenged the loss within a year, stopping the Cuban journeyman. In 1964, Saldivar stopped Sugar Ramos in the 12th round and walked away with the featherweight title. Still, some wondered whether Saldivar was that good or whether Sugar Ramos had been past it. After all, 4 months earlier, Ramos had needed help in winning a close decision over Floyd Robertson. Saldivar erased any doubts when he stopped Robertson in fewer than 2 rounds. He defended his title 7 times, including 3 wins over the Brit Howard Winstone. The first 2 wins for Saldivar were competitive, including the rematch in England. But in the third, Saldivar fought Winstone in Mexico and soundly defeated him. Then, Saldivar called it quits. The impromptu retirement came in 1967, when he was only 24 years old. It is said that he retired due to damage incurred during his high-octane fights. If he would have ended it then, it would have been a good career. But Saldivar returned in the summer of 1969. He scored a win over former champion Jose Legra. And then, with only 1 comeback fight, he jumped in with the champion, Johnny Famechon, a smooth, fleet-footed boxer. Famechon had taken the title from Legra before defending it twice against the Japanese Fighting Harada. The Saldivar fight took place in Rome, Italy. In front of 16,000 people, Saldivar initiated the action, punching from all angles. By the third, Famechon got going, but Saldivar continued landing. Saldivar was relentless and landed 3 shots for every Famechon punch. Saldivar's left was on point in the 9th. Famechon landed a booming right in the 11th, but Saldivar kept coming. Famechon started landing his left in the championship rounds, but Saldivar dropped him in the 13th. The two-man battled down the stretch, but Saldivar had been too active in the early rounds, and in the end, he walked away as a two-time world champion. Famechon believed he'd won the fight, claiming he'd done more damage. Meanwhile, Adolfo Perez, Saldivar's manager, praised the former champion, but maintained that his fighter had won the decision. Famechon would never fight again. Meanwhile, Saldivar immediately lost his title against Kuniaki Shibata, suffering a stoppage defeat. He retired once more after one fight, but then returned 2 years later to challenge the excellent Eder Jofre. By then, the magic was gone, as Saldivar was stopped in the 4th round. Nevertheless, the defenses he made in his initial reign, along with his improbable comeback, make him one of the best fighters of all time. Much like with a blue-chip investment, many boxing fans wish to be on the ground floor of something magical. When the fighter becomes great, those fans can say they were present from the start. Born in Mexico, Francisco Panchito Bojado's mix of speed and power dazzled the critics. He grew up mostly in California and built a following in 2 countries. He made it to the Mexican Olympic team in 2000, but failed to medal. Still, out of all the potential stars from the various Olympic teams, Bojado carried the most hype, partly due to his young age of 17. And when he turned pro, he lived up to the buzz. By 2002, he was only 18 years old, but had already racked 9 wins, all by stoppage. None of his opponents made it past the 3rd round.
Everything about Francisco Bojado says winner to me. He's my favorite prospect in boxing. The buzz in boxing circles is about how great this kid is going to be. Not the same with any other fighter in boxing right now.
Champion! Champion! That's what I say when I see Bojado. Just his presence. Champion. Champion. No doubt about it. A star.
Just 18 years old. Doesn't even shave yet.
Well, in 76 it was Ray Leonard. In 88 it was Roy Jones. In 92 it was Oscar De La Hoya. This is the kind of company Panchito Bojado is keeping. That's pretty good company.
He can kind of carry boxing on his shoulders. If everything goes well, he's going to be the next superstar.
Such was Bojado's ability that it compelled Showtime Boxing's leader Jay Larkin to say, "Francisco Bojado, oh my god, every time he gets into the ring, we keep asking ourselves, is he as good as we think he is?" And yeah, he is. This kid is lightning in a bottle. He's extraordinary. I say a year and a half from now, he's the biggest name in boxing. It seemed as if buying Francisco Bojado's stock was a surefire thing. Then, February 2002 arrived. It had been mere weeks since the end of 2001, a year that was dubbed Upset Central, as many of the top pound-for-pound fighters incurred devastating losses. A month earlier, it appeared as if the custom had become a full-blown epidemic when the #1 pound-for-pound contender Sugar Shane Mosley lost his undefeated record to Vernon Forrest. But Bojado's next opponent, Juan Carlos Rubio, a skinny pug with a 26-6-2 record, failed to look the part of a spoiler. Now, with barely a year in as a professional, Bojado was set for a 10-rounder. Still, on fight night, an ominous portent occurred when the legendary Jack Jones, singer of the Love Boats theme, forgot the words to the national anthem. The crowd, instead of helping him out, pelted him with obscenities. Jones would require a police escort to exit the casino, but Bojado didn't need any help. He launched bombs early and rocked Rubio. In the second, Bojado's shots kept bouncing off Rubio, but the underdog replied. Bojado landed a bomb in the third, but the shots that usually stopped opponents only seemed to anger Rubio. Another bomb rocked Rubio in the fourth, but he stayed in the game. Not only did Rubio have a chin, but his combos were smooth. In the fifth, Bojado continued firing, but Rubio replied with volume. This would be a war of attrition, something few had expected. And Bojado was sucking wind. The young stalwart picked his shots, but Rubio took him and surged on. In the seventh, Bojado caught his second wind, and the action heated up. In the eighth, a tired Bojado touched the canvas, and it was ruled a knockdown. Rubio plugged away in the ninth, and one wondered whether Bojado would hear the final bell. To Bojado's credit, he championed on. In the end, Rubio pulled off the upset.
Juan Carlos Rubio.
Bojado would later blame the loss on having to lose 25 pounds in less than a month, but fans wondered how that was anyone else's fault. Commentator Teddy Atlas would later state that Bojado's ego had been overinflated by yes men. Years later, reporter Robert Morales corroborated Atlas's claims, stating that Bojado had grown lazy and added that Bojado's popularity with women had played a part in his downfall. Bojado's trainer, Roger Bloodworth, credited Bojado for going to war at the tender age of 18. Bojado, meanwhile, claimed he'd rather lose early in his career than to suffer defeat during a championship bout. He ended up hiring Floyd Mayweather Sr. for his training, and a year later, he was back in against Rubio. There, Bojado displayed improved defense and conditioning. He also focused on Rubio's thin body and scored a knockdown in the 11th. After 12 rounds, Bojado gained his revenge.
Panchito Bojado.
A year later, in 2004, Bojado stepped up in level against veteran Jesse James Leija. Bojado dropped Leija in the second and landed the hardest shots. But once again, the lighter puncher managed to outwork him. And Leija scored a split decision victory. Bojado disappeared for 3 years before returning in 2007. He scored some wins before suffering another loss to veteran Stevie Forbes. He has not fought since. Rubio, for his part, was supposed to fight another 2000 Olympian in Ricardo Williams, but pulled out at the last minute. Rubio scored more wins, but never received another big shot, and retired with a loss in 2006. Today, the Bojado story remains a cautionary tale about overhyping a fighter. Floyd Mayweather is considered one of the greatest fighters of all time, thanks in part to his undefeated record, but many contend that record should be marred by losses. And we're not just talking about the Castillo or Maidana fights. Back in the summer of 2005, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Zab Judah were not only friends, but on top of the boxing world. The undefeated Mayweather had recently competed in his first successful pay-per-view after demolishing the popular Arturo Gatti. Campaigning at 140 pounds, Mayweather had the option of fighting the champion Ricky Hatton, but the fight failed to materialize. What Mayweather really wanted was a fight with the face of boxing, Oscar De La Hoya. However, the Golden Boy was semi-retired, having last competed in the middleweight division. Meanwhile, in the welterweight division, the Brooklyn native Zab Judah reigned as champion. Possessing the enviable mix of speed and power, Judah had traveled a rocky road. Having turned pro in 1996, the Southpaw Judah was anointed as a future all-time great. One of his big supporters, Max Kellerman, even referred to him as Pernell Whitaker with power. But the ride was derailed in 2001 when Judah fought Tszyu in a bout designed to crown the undisputed junior welterweight champion. There, Tszyu knocked Judah out. This summoned a tantrum from the American. Judah scored subsequent wins, but looked shaky in some of them, leading many to believe he'd been severely overrated. However, he would later heal his image against welterweight champion Corey Spinks. After suffering a razor-thin loss in 2004, Judah rematched Spinks, and contrary to their first match, Judah never relented, halting Spinks in the 9th round. Judah then looked sensational in obliterating contender Cosme Rivera in May 2005. Judah had finally sharpened up, but would a Mayweather fight happen? Depending on the source, it was alleged that Mayweather and Judah had always been friendly. Growing up in the amateurs, it was expected for both men to be familiar with each other, and Mayweather was also seen supporting Judah when the Brooklyn native had fought DeMarcus Corley. But then, Judah called him out after the Gatti bout. And in the fall of 2005, rumors circulated that somewhere between 2004 and 2005, Mayweather and Judah had sparred in Las Vegas. Allegedly, not only did Mayweather dominate Judah, but he also demeaned him verbally. As negotiations solidified for a spring 2006 bout, the animosity intensified. with Judah calling Mayweather "pretty girl." Judah, however, had a mandatory defense scheduled for January 2006 against Carlos Baldomir. The Argentinian's lackluster record reflected his mundane style, but what he lacked in physical talent, he made up with an iron chin, impeccable conditioning, and underrated skills. A listless Judah ended up getting wobbled in the 7th round and lost his championship by unanimous decision. Illogically, the Mayweather-Judah bout proceeded on pay-per-view. Now, Mayweather revealed more details of the infamous Judah sparring session. Allegedly, in 2004, a still friendly Mayweather and Judah had been training at the top-ranked gym. There, Mayweather asserted that Judah had been overly rough with one of Mayweather's proteges during sparring. Days later, Judah and Mayweather found themselves back in the gym, with former heavyweight champion Hasim Rahman instigating both men to spar. Mayweather and Judah engaged in 4 rounds, which, according to Mayweather, heated up when Judah initiated smack talk. According to Floyd and his uncle trainer Roger, Floyd dished out a beating before the session was halted. Judah, who incensed the media by refusing to participate in the fight's build-up, remained conservative, stating that he knew how to beat Mayweather. Fighting in Las Vegas, Judah appeared correct. Time after time, Judah was too fast for Mayweather, beating him to the punch. In the second, Judah dropped Mayweather, but referee Richard Steele incorrectly ruled it a slip. Mayweather upped the aggression in the third, but continued being countered. In the fourth, Judah landed a big left hand. Then, in that very same round, Mayweather began crowding Judah. He took the first shot, but returned with 2 more of his own. Soon, Judah was overwhelmed, and Mayweather pounded Judah's body, pinning him in place. The 9th and 10th rounds turned into a beating for Judah. But then, the Brooklynite retaliated. The referee called timeout, but Roger Mayweather was incensed. The situation escalated when Yoel Judah, Zap's father and trainer, followed suit. Pandemonium ensued. It took 5 minutes for the action to resume. Roger Mayweather was expelled from the corner, and Floyd fought without him. Mayweather failed to regain the momentum he'd built in the previous 5 rounds. He coasted in the 12th and walked away with a unanimous decision. Judges Jerry Roth and Glenn Hamada scored virtually every round for Mayweather, even the early ones. The Nevada State Athletic Commission would later fine and suspend Roger Mayweather, cornerman Leonard Ellerbe, along with Zab and Yoel Judah. But some wondered why Floyd Mayweather had avoided a disqualification loss when his trainer had entered the ring during the bout. Mark Reitner, executive director of the Nevada State Athletic Commission, stated that disqualifying a fighter when a member of his corner enters the ring is up to the referee's discretion. But some wondered whether Mayweather, technically a Las Vegas fighter, had been favored by the establishment. Others pointed to the white scorecards as further evidence of shadow play. Still, in the end, Mayweather had established himself as a legitimate welterweight, and a Hall of Fame career awaited him. Judah, meanwhile, never regained the success he'd started in 2005, though he continued scoring some decent wins, along with gaining some big paydays. In the end, the bout served as a precedent for similar incidents. In the days of the original 8 weight classes, it was difficult enough to win a world championship, but more difficult still was winning championships in 2 divisions. This is what Dick Tiger attempted in the mid-1960s. Born in Nigeria, Tiger turned pro during his early 20s. Suffering from bad management, Tiger learned on the job, fighting in Nigeria and later relocating to England, winning many of his bouts, but also incurring some losses. Standing at 5 feet and 8 inches tall, Tiger was a strong middleweight with impeccable conditioning, as evidenced by his suffocating pressure style. Once in the USA, Tiger beat some of the best middleweights in the world, including Joey Giardello, Gene Fullmer, Terry Downs, and more. It was only after a decade in the game that Tiger received a title shot. In the fall of 1962, Tiger challenged fellow strongman Gene Fullmer. Tiger outfought Fullmer and won the middleweight title. In the rematch, a determined Fullmer pulled out a draw. But in the rubber match, Tiger, empowered by his home crowd, dished out a beating and halted Fullmer in the 7th round. In his third defense, Tiger met an old nemesis, Joey Giardello. The pair had split a win and a loss prior to Tiger's championship win. Giardello secured a win in the rubber match, and according to some, preferred defending it against anyone other than Tiger. Meanwhile, Tiger stayed sharp by scoring wins, including a beating over Ruben Hurricane Carter, who described it as the worst beatdown he ever received. Then, in the fall of 1965, Tiger finally met Giardello for a fourth time. A fired-up Tiger crowded Giardello for all 15 rounds and regained the middleweight title. But he was 36 years old now, ancient for his era, and weight issues led to a razor-thin loss against former welterweight champion Emil Griffith. Having done it all at 160 pounds, Tiger moved up to the light heavyweight division and challenged the champion, Jose Torrez. Under Cosdamato's tutelage, Torrez had stopped Willie Pastrana for the light heavyweight championship. Like Tiger, Torrez was an aggressive fighter, pressuring behind the notorious peekaboo guard. The problem for the Nigerian was that Torrez was bigger, stronger, and younger. Torrez got off to a fast start and pumped a heavy jab. But Tiger, 8 pounds lighter, managed to flurry on the inside. Tiger fought from a crouch position and took a heavy right to start the third. Torrez landed bombs, but Tiger didn't go anywhere. Torrez ended the round with a body shot, and things grew bleak for Tiger. Both men traded jabs in the fifth. Torrez landed another big right, but Tiger replied. Still, Torrez piled on. But Tiger continued working the body. After the sixth, Tiger's accuracy improved, though Torrez continued landing as well. Through the middle rounds, Tiger outworked Torrez. In the 13th, Tiger had his best round, rocking Torrez. The champion regained his second win in the championship rounds, but the bout remained heavily contested. In the end, Tiger's late rally was enough to nab him a unanimous decision, and he'd become one of the rare fighters to capture both the middleweight and light heavyweight championships. Tiger and Torrez rematched the following year. The Nigerian won a razor-close decision, which prompted a riot in Madison Square Garden. Torrez would retire shortly after and engage in various administrative positions, including New York State Athletic Commissioner as well as president of the WBO. Meanwhile, Tiger notched one more defense before losing the championship to the much taller Bob Foster. Still, Tiger notched a couple of more wins, including a non-title victory over middleweight champion Nino Benvenuti. He called it a career not long after in 1970, but died of cancer the following year at the age of 42. Still, Tiger remains the best fighter to hail from the African continent and one of the best fighters of all time. Boxing fans love big punchers, but if there's one thing they love more, is when two big punchers fight. There are many reasons why the bantamweight Ruben Olivares is so beloved in Mexico. He was an affable personality, he fought the best, possessed a classic left hook to the liver, and more importantly, he could crack. Julio Cesar Chavez is often ranked as the best Mexican boxer ever, but Olivares doesn't fall far behind. But whereas Chavez dominated during his prime years, Olivares dazzled with an all-action style that often left him vulnerable. Olivares plied his trade in Mexico during the mid-1960s. Then, he stopped Olympic gold medalist Takao Sakurai in the 6th round. So, how hard could he hit? He was 51-0 with 49 stoppages by the time he received his first title shot. This came on August 1969, when he fought the Australian Lionel Rose. Rose was competitive early on, but soon, Olivares took over, and the Australian went the way of Olivares' 49 previous opponents. The catch was that Rose had been draining himself to make 118 pounds, so one wondered how good Olivares was. Olivares defended his unified titles by becoming the first man to stop Alan Rudkin, and proceeded to score some non-title wins. Then, in 1970, he took on Chucho Castillo. Castillo had unsuccessfully challenged Rose for his title and had lost a contentious decision. But fighting in front of 18,000 people at the legendary Inglewood Forum, Castillo gave Olivares hell. dropping him early. But Olivares was the better man and showed he could go the full 15 rounds, winning a decision. But the fans demanded a rematch. In October of 1970, Olivares pressured Castillo, but the sharp-punching challenger caught him, prompting the referee to halt the bout. This marred Olivares' perfect record of 62 wins with 55 knockouts. The rubber match took place in the spring of 1971. Castillo managed to drop Olivares, but the challenger boxed his way to a conclusive decision win and regained his titles. He scored some non-title wins and one more defense before ending the year with a risky move against fellow puncher Jesus Pimentel. Pimentel could be unboxed, as Chucho Castillo showed in 1968, but if he caught a guy properly, they were gone. Consider that he put together numerous KO win streaks, the longest one taking place between 1961 and 65, when he scored 28 straight stoppages. By the time he finally got his title shot against Olivares in 1971, he was an old 31. But Olivares, who often curtailed his training with wild parties, was no one's idea of a defensive wizard, even if he could box when he wanted to. On top of this, as seen in the second Castillo fight, he was prone to cuts. And with Pimentel's power, anything could happen. Fittingly, the bout took place at the Forum. Olivares started the bout on the retreat, with both men firing heavy jabs and power shots. In the second, Olivares continued boxing, but the action heated up. In the third, Olivares worked Pimentel over, but the challenger stood his ground, and a big right buckled Olivares' knees. Later in the fight, Olivares returned the favor by dropping Pimentel, but the challenger continued swinging, confident in his power, and Olivares replied. Both warriors absorbed bumps, but continued trading. As the championship rounds neared, Olivares' sharper combinations wore Pimentel down. Finally, in the 11th, Pimentel's corner pulled him out. It had been another exciting bout courtesy of Olivares, but it would be Pimentel's last, as he retired immediately after the bout. In 2006, KO Boxing's sister publication, Boxing 2006, ranked Pimentel number 20 in the list of all-time greatest Mexican boxers, and took the number 60 spot on the list of the best 100 punchers ever. Olivares, meanwhile, immediately lost his championships in a stoppage loss to Rafael Herrera. He blamed his struggles on making weight and moved up to featherweight. Still, he was unable to best Herrera in a rematch. But the ride continued in 1973 when he met future champion Bobby Chacon, stopping him in the 9th round. Olivares' parting caught up to him when he lost in a monumental upset against Art Hafey. The Mexican avenged the loss and then won a vacant featherweight title by stopping Zensuke Uragawa. But he soon lost it to another future great in Alexis Arguello. This after performing exceptionally well. He returned to rematch Chacon, now a featherweight titleist, and Olivares stopped him in the 2nd round. But he would once again lose his title against an unknown fighter in David Cody. He was then stopped by future champion Danny Lopez, and then proceeded to lose a decision in the rubber match against Chacon. He scored one final high-quality win against an up-and-coming Jose Luis Ramirez, stopping him in the 2nd round. From there, the success was sporadic as he continued fighting well into the late 1980s. But when he retired, his Hall of Fame career was secured. If at first you don't succeed, try again. This is the advice Jersey Joe Walcott undertook later in his career. Born Arnold Raymond Cream in Camden, New Jersey, Walcott turned pro at the age of 16. He started off as a middleweight in 1930 and later beefed up to heavyweight as he reached adulthood. But he capped as a journeyman with a record of 24 wins and 10 losses and took 4 years off during World War II. By 1947, Walcott had worked his way up to contender and earned a shot at the long-reigning champion, Joe Louis. At 33 years old, Walcott was the oldest man to have ever challenged for the belt, and he rose to the occasion, dropping Louis twice and befuddling the champion. Unfortunately, Walcott was robbed. But things grew worse when Louis stopped him in the rematch in 1948. A year later, after Louis's retirement, Walcott fought Eder Charles for the vacant title. Like Walcott, Charles had competed as a middleweight early in his career and weighed a mere 180 pounds when he met Walcott. Charles outboxed the New Jersey native. Walcott scored more wins and challenged Charles in 1951, but again was easily outboxed. Shockingly, he immediately received a third shot at Charles. By the time of the rubber match, Charles had beaten a comebacking Joe Louis and had defended the title a number of times, thus establishing himself as the king of the heavyweight division. Walcott, for his part, was seen as a never-was, and going into the 1951 bout, the bookies had him as a 9-1 underdog. This time, the 37-year-old Walcott punched with aplomb, setting his feet and pursuing Charles. Walcott feinted with his right. Both men exchanged near the end of the third, refusing to heed. Walcott nabbed the fourth with jabs. In the fifth, Charles reasserted control. But Walcott ended the round with a big right hand. Both men exchanged in the sixth. And Walcott continued landing the left hook. Then, in the seventh, Walcott ended it. At 37 years of age, and on his fifth try, Walcott had become the heavyweight champion of the world. He defended his title against, you guessed it, Eder Charles, scoring a unanimous decision. But then lost it to a rampaging Rocky Marciano in 1952. The older Walcott had managed to drop Marciano and was ahead in the cards before the Massachusetts native scored one of the best knockouts of all time. Walcott lost the rematch in less competitive fashion and then retired. He spent some time in Hollywood acting in feature films and later became Camden County Sheriff. He would then act as chairman of the New York State Athletic Commission. As far as being heavyweight champion, he'd accomplished his goal, even if it took a bit longer than he'd wanted. Going into 2010, Chad Dawson was considered boxing's future star. Packed with speed and flash, Dawson looked every bit a superstar. So much so that some proclaim he'd not only dominate the light heavyweight division, but the cruiserweight as well. In 2007, he took on the undefeated power puncher, Thomas Adamek. And save for a knockdown incurred in the 10th round, Dawson spent the fight baffling and diverting the pole around the ring. The win earned him an alphabet title. A year later, he took on the former champion, Glenn Johnson. The bout proved trickier than expected, as Johnson gave the prodigy all he could handle, before Dawson pulled out a disputed decision. That very year, he fought another member of the old guard as he faced former champion Antonio Tarver. Dawson easily manhandled the aging star, en route to an unsurprising decision win. An unnecessary rematch took place in 2009, and though it proved slightly more competitive, Dawson proved the superior fighter. That same year, he rematched Glenn Johnson. This time, Dawson did what had been expected the first time, as he kept Johnson at the end of his punches and proved too fast and elusive for the former champion. Now, Dawson was king, and one of the biggest stars, Floyd Mayweather Jr., proclaimed Dawson the next pound-for-pound king. Unfortunately, Dawson's pugilistic accolades failed to produce box office appeal. Fighting in his home state of Connecticut, Dawson drew a little over 5,000 people to see the Johnson rematch. There was also the issue of his cautious approach, which saw him go 48 total rounds against the aging stars. To make matters worse, Dawson claimed he was happy with the performances. The Adamek win was paying dividends, as the pole delivered scintillating performances at cruiserweight. With a lack of domestic support and eager to show his mettle, Dawson decided to fight in the icy confines of the Canadian North. His opponent would be the local star, Jean Pascal. A 2004 Olympian, the bulky Pascal possessed an unorthodox style, backed by deceptive quickness. With a loyal following, Pascal defeated the usual diet of foes, such as the granite-fisted Darnell Boone and contender Kingsley Akiki. He took a risk in 2008, traveling to the UK to take on fellow undefeated super middleweight Carl Froch. The two men tore into each other for a vacant title. And though Pascal emerged the loser, he demonstrated an indomitable will, along with a granite chin. In 2009, he moved up to the light heavyweight division and won a vacant title against the undefeated Adrian Diacono. In the rematch, Pascal's heart re-emerged as he boxed suffering from a dislocated shoulder en route to a decision win. The victories landed Pascal at number 3 spot on Ring Magazine's light heavyweight rankings. Then came the Dawson fight. The American occupied the number 1 spot in Ring Magazine's rankings, which meant that the Pascal bout would be for the lineal championship of the world. In the beginning, Pascal circled the ring. Dawson landed a good body shot and kept Pascal at the end of his shots. Meanwhile, Pascal rushed with sudden bursts. In the second, Pascal's flurries excited the crowd. And he managed to block Dawson's counter-attack. In the third, both men sniped from the center of the ring. By the round's midpoint, Pascal's game was clear. Dart around the ring, lull Dawson to sleep, and then explode to seal the round. In the fourth, Dawson landed a nice uppercut, but again, remained too inactive. Urged on by his trainer, Eddie Mustafa Mohammed, Dawson upped the aggression in the fifth. In the sixth, Pascal tried to retake the momentum. Dawson replied, but did so sporadically. Pascal started quickly in the seventh and stunned Dawson. The attack woke the American up, but he was in a fight now, and Pascal was likely ahead. Dawson stepped on the gas to start the eighth, but again, his careful demeanor took over. Then, late in the round, his attack got him tagged. Now, Dawson's cautiousness became understandable. A fired-up Pascal took it to Dawson in the ninth. And the American finally dug down to reply. But in the 10th, Dawson returned to his sheepish approach. In the 11th, Dawson finally mounted a consistent attack, and Pascal seemed out of breath. Then the men clashed heads, and the bout went to a technical decision. Pascal ended up winning and was now the lineal light heavyweight champion. Dawson had been too patient, and it cost him his first defeat. Pascal would defend his championship later that year against Bernard Hopkins. Twice, the Canadian dropped Hopkins, becoming the first man to drop him in close to 15 years. But the old man rallied late to eke out a draw. They did it again in 2011, this time in Montreal, and Hopkins outboxed Pascal in a hotly contested bout to snatch his titles away. Pascal rebounded with 3 wins, including one against hometown rival Lucien Boutte. Then, in 2015, he gave a rampaging Sergey Kovalev his toughest test to date, before being halted in the 8th. Then, Kovalev dominated him in a 2016 rematch. Pascal's career appeared over after incurring losses to Eder Alvarez and Dimitri Bivol, but then he pulled an upset over the undefeated Marcus Brown in a repeat of the Dawson fight. Then eked out a decision over former super middleweight titleist Badou Jack. As of this recording, Pascal remains an active boxer. Dawson, for his part, bounced back in 2011 to outbox Adrian Diacono. Then, he took on Bernard Hopkins. The first bout ended in a no contest, as a Dawson tackle injured Hopkins. But in the rematch, Dawson outboxed Hopkins and regained his championship. Dawson would later make the insane decision of moving down in weight and challenge Andre Ward at 168 pounds. Ward went on to dominate Dawson. Rumors would later circulate that the puncher Edison Miranda had iced Dawson during sparring. This appeared credible when Dawson returned to 175 and challenger Adonis Stevenson knocked him out in the first round. From there, Dawson scored some subpar wins and lost twice, once by stoppage against Andre from Farah. He retired in 2022.
You are watching BDA Boxing. If you're enjoying this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
In boxing, not all wars have to last 12 rounds. This is what the world saw on November 1984 in Kingston, New York. The main event featured hometown hero Billy Costello defending his super lightweight title. But it was a co-feature that would tantalize the audience. There, the murderous puncher Jaime Garza, 40-0 with 38 knockouts, defended his super bantamweight title against veteran Juan Mesa, also a respectable puncher with 31 knockouts out of 40 victories. Garza was on the fast track to stardom. He was expected to dispose of Mesa, who had been stopped by the great Wilfredo Gomez years earlier. But though the Puerto Rican had stopped Mesa, the Mexican had never tasted the canvas during his long career. Garza, meanwhile, had hit the canvas numerous times before coming out victorious. For both men, it was live by the gun, die by the gun. The day of the fight, the usually calm Mesa approached Garza, who was eating lunch, and told him he needed to eat well to prepare for what was coming. This appeared to get under Garza's skin. A fired-up Garza started out as expected and dropped Mesa. The Mexican appeared bewildered, but managed to rise. The two men exchanged, but Mesa fell to the canvas. Then, a punch that sounded like a baseball scoring a home run erupted.
Wide punches. Oh, big left hand. Goes Garza. Mesa sends Garza to the canvas. Punches. Oh, punches. Oh, big left hand.
The fight was over. Mesa would score one defense before losing it to the great Lupe Pintor. Garza, for his part, failed to fulfill his promise as a pound-for-pound entrant and incurred several losses before retiring in 1995. And that was it. In the middle of a New York rec center, in a fight serving as an undercard bout, boxing fans were treated to one of the shortest and most exciting fights of the 1980s. If there's one major theme in many of these videos, it's that upsets make the boxing world go around. And when one such event is dubbed a Cinderella story, you know the upset was unexpected. During the mid-1920s, James J. Braddock spent his time as a light heavyweight fighter. Renowned for his chin and endurance, Braddock worked his way up to a title shot. This came in 1929 against Tommy Loughran. Braddock lost a close 15-round decision, but injured his right hand in the process. To make matters worse, the defeat came on the heels of the Great Depression. Braddock continued to fight, but incurred more losses than wins, in part due to his right hand's brittle state. This culminated in the Abe Feldman bout, where Braddock broke his right hand again and delivered a desultory performance that was ruled a no contest. Unaware of Braddock's injury, the public believed he was finished as an athlete. In the midst of a nationwide economic crash, Braddock endured extreme poverty as he battled to feed his family. Daily, he would walk numerous miles to seek out work as a longshoreman. If there had been work, Braddock would make the return trek with a pittance in his pocket. Otherwise, he'd walk more miles, looking for whatever menial task he could perform. He tried to get more boxing fights, but the New York Commission prohibited him from doing so based on the Feldman bout. Still, the inactivity helped heal his hand. Then, almost a year after the Feldman bout, Braddock was pitted against John Griffin. Braddock had but a few days to prepare and was served as a sacrificial lamb for the rising Griffin. Griffin had built his reputation primarily due to having bested the champion Primo Carnera during sparring. But the sparring sessions had created a bit of a mirage, as Carnera's worth as a boxer left much to be desired. Despite being seen as a mere stepping stone, Braddock gave it his all in a short war, and in the end, he halted Griffin. But the win failed to attract the desired adulation, as contender Max Baer proceeded to expose Carnera that very night by taking his title via stoppage. Indirectly, it solid Braddock's upset over Griffin. On the third, Braddock pulled another upset when he defeated John Henry Lewis by decision. With 2 upset victories under his belt, Braddock leveraged them for an opportunity to fight contender Art Lasky. With his conditioning improved thanks to real training camps, Braddock outboxed Lasky. The win reminded people of his name and led to a title shot against the champion, Max Baer. Yes, Baer had lifted the title of the gigantic but severely flawed Primo Carnera, but it also blasted out top contender Max Schmeling prior to that bout. On top of this, Baer had killed Frankie Campbell on August 1930, and though the tragedy deeply affected Baer, it didn't prevent the press from labeling him as a lethal fighter. Did Braddock have a chance? Allegedly, Baer grew overconfident after pummeling Carnera and Schmeling. Moreover, it was rumored that he didn't love boxing and regarded it as a lucrative job. Now, he openly derided Braddock's worth as a challenger and even warned him that he would hurt him. Braddock remained unfazed, confident he developed as a boxer. It is rumored that Baer's trainer became incensed hours before the fight, when his champion had intercourse with an admirer. On fight night, Braddock ran straight at Baer. Shocked by the pace, Baer absorbed the punishment. He finally woke up mid-fight, but his money punch failed to rattle Braddock. The challenger fought like a beast, and the champion relegated himself to clowning. It would later be revealed that Baer was dejected, not only by his inability to deter Braddock, but also from the crowd's support for the challenger. By round 10, Baer found his second win and wailed at Braddock. But the challenger remained steadfast and refused to budge. In the end, he won a unanimous decision. Baer would later claim to the press that he'd fractured both hands, but conceded to a defeat, which he admitted also stemmed from overconfidence. He would later announce his retirement. Braddock, meanwhile, was the toast of the town, and the buzz from his win prevented him from sleeping. Now, the writers who derided him ate crow, and Braddock's days of walking to the piers seemed like a distant dream. Baer found himself suddenly energized by the loss and unretired, but was unfortunate to run into a rampaging Joe Louis, who halted him in the 4th round. Baer continued boxing, but never received another shot at the title. He later delved into a wild assortment of ventures, such as acting in movies and nightclubs, as well as working in public relations. He passed away in November 1958. Braddock, meanwhile, milked his title for all it was worth, boxing in exhibition matches. Joe Louis, who had been growing in popularity after trouncing Carnera and Baer, suffered an upset loss to Max Schmeling. This led Braddock and his brain trust to believe they could defeat the young contender. In the summer of 1937, Braddock appeared headed to another upset when he dropped Louis in the 1st round. But Louis bounced back to dish out a beating and handed Braddock the first legitimate stoppage loss of his career. Braddock had one win over Tommy Farr before retiring. He continued living modestly, still receiving fan mail until his death in 1974. Braddock's victory over Baer was later adapted into a 2005 movie, but many boxing fans derided it for unfairly portraying Baer as an arrogant bully. Still, Braddock's memory endures yearly in boxing, reminding its participants to never overlook an opponent. The middleweight division has long been lauded as one of boxing's prestige divisions. It is said that its fighters possess the speed of lightweights and the power of heavyweights. For many, this remains boxing's best division. As such, winning its lineal championship is considered the stuff of greatness. But sometimes, the issue can be more complicated. Bernard Hopkins never had it easy. After a 5-year stint in prison, the Philadelphian lost his first professional bout. He regrouped and with the help of his trainer, Bowie Fischer, Hopkins rampaged through the middleweight division. In 1993, he lost his first bid at a portion of the middleweight crown against a future all-time great, Roy Jones Jr. But a year and a half later, he gained the IBF belt against Segundo Mercado. But the recognition he desired remained elusive. Roy Jones departed for higher weight classes, and Hopkins was left fighting unheralded opposition. These, however, were hungry fighters, and some victories were far from easy.
And he goes through the rope and down to the ground.
A knockdown to Millsley.
Oh, he hit.
And as Eccles pauses to try to front the corner weeks.
But Hopkins always emerged on top.
He's all over Allen now. Straight right by Hopkins.
Hopkins dreamed of mega fights, but it was considered a case of high risk, low reward. Hopkins' constant change of promoters also led to instability, and he was seen as a rogue character. But for some boxing fans, his anti-establishment persona earned him sympathy. In 2001, the power-punching Felix Tito Trinidad moved up to 160 pounds. The undefeated Puerto Rican was considered unstoppable, as he joined a 4-man middleweight tournament. Hopkins beat fellow title holder Keith Holmes to reach the final, and then proceeded to dole out a legendary performance against Trinidad, halting him in the 12th round. At 36 years of age, Hopkins had become the undisputed middleweight champion. The world was ready for a Roy Jones rematch, which led to some preliminary confrontations.
I'm really too big for Bernard Hopkins. I beat Bernard Hopkins before with one hand.
Talk is cheap.
Hey, I'm the champ. I'm the champ. 64, I'll tear your ass up.
Negotiate any further here.
There were also talks of a bout with the undefeated super middleweight, Joe Calzaghe. Negotiations crumbled, and Hopkins only fought once in 2002. Then, his fiery character cost him in court. In the late 1990s, Hopkins had engaged the advisory services of Lou DiBella. Back in the mid-90s, DiBella had worked as an executive for HBO, then the home of boxing. DiBella left the network and went independent. He helped Hopkins navigate his way into the middleweight tournament in 2001. But then, just as the union flourished, Hopkins cut him loose. Later that year, Hopkins would claim that DiBella, while still an HBO employee back in 2000, had demanded a $50,000 bribe so that Hopkins could fight on the network. DiBella denied the allegation and sued Hopkins, winning a substantial settlement. The war, however, was far from over. In 2000, DiBella signed one of America's next boxing hopes, Jermaine Taylor. Hailing from Little Rock, Arkansas, Taylor had encountered a rocky life. Raised by his sisters, Taylor navigated gang-infested waters and had to live through the tragedy of having his uncle murder their grandmother. Boxing, however, kept him centered, and he managed to medal bronze at the Sydney Olympics. Taylor possessed speed, power, and a ramrod jab. He was also a soft-spoken man, which DiBella hoped would endear him to the fans.
This, I believe, is the future of the middleweight division, Jermaine Taylor. I said, how fast before he wins the Ring Magazine Championship middleweight? I give him 12 to 18 months.
Emmanuel, what is that star quality that makes Jermaine Taylor seem to be the heir apparent, even though he has yet to face what the boxing experts feel is a serious middleweight opponent?
The movements and the way that he fights where his punches are delivered in such crisp, precision form. There's nothing sloppy about it. His whole performance is always what we say, top quality performance. And I just believe that the style that he has, his great amateur background, and the whole overall aura that he brings to boxing just points him to being a superstar. And I'm just enjoying being able to watch it rise.
In 2004, the quality of opposition grew, and Taylor fought 4 times. He stopped Alex Bunema, former junior middleweight titleist Raul Marquez, and easily decisioned former middleweight titleist William Joppy. The latter proved his best win. And though Taylor had dropped Joppy, some criticized him for his inability to stop him. A year earlier, a 38-year-old Hopkins had brutalized Joppy en route to a 12-round decision and had performed a hatchet job on his opponent's face. For many, despite Hopkins being 11 years older, the Philadelphian remained too much for Taylor. In early 2005, Hopkins notched his 20th defense of the middleweight championship, setting the record for most middleweight defenses. The achievement established him as one of the best middleweights ever. Jermaine Taylor, for his part, notched an easy third-round stoppage of the undefeated Daniel Edouard. The bout took place on Hopkins' undercard, and the time was ripe for a Hopkins-Taylor bout. The fight was scheduled for July 2005, and it was presented as a classic Old Lion versus Young Lion event. By this time, Roy Jones had lost his position as the best fighter in the world, and now Hopkins found himself atop the pound-for-pound mountain. Moreover, a year earlier in 2004, Hopkins had secured a mega fight against the face of boxing, Oscar De La Hoya. There, Hopkins became the first to stop the Golden Boy and received life-changing money. In the past, Hopkins had drawn strength from being the underdog. Now, being the rich A-side, as well as the fight's favorite, Hopkins ran the risk of losing his edge. He appeared hungry for something to rail against, and he did so by zeroing in on Taylor's promoter, Lou DiBella. Hopkins accused his former advisor of still feeling scorned and compared him to an obsessed ex-girlfriend. He also relished the idea of beating both Taylor and by extension DiBella on the same night, comparing it to a second erection.
A lot of people believe that the only reason Bernard elected to fight Jermaine Taylor at the time when he did is because Jermaine's advisor/promoter was Lou DiBella.
But further quotes illustrate that it was Hopkins who was making it personal. That's my motivation. Jermaine Taylor is going to be the whipping boy of my controlled frustrations. This is a great country where I can go in a ring and do something I love to do and actually assault somebody. He also relished the idea of driving DiBella out of business and esteemed it as scoring 2 knockouts in one night.
You ain't putting me out of business, Bernard. And on the night of July 16th, when you're twitching on the campus, the only thing that's going to end is the executioner's error.
Hopkins also attacked Taylor's toughness, along with questioning his blackness. Hopkins had always been seen as the consummate pro, a man who never underestimated opponents. But here, he spoke of future fights against Jones and his conqueror, Antonio Tarver. The proceedings intensified during fight week. DiBella would claim that Hopkins had warned him that he would drive him to suicide after Taylor lost. Years earlier, DiBella's brother had become paralyzed after a skiing accident. The man committed suicide, something DiBella had confided to Hopkins during their partnership. He now took the comment as a direct affront to his deceased brother. But Hopkins' ire proved indiscriminate as he quarreled with the legendary trainer, Emanuel Stewart, during a pre-fight meeting. Allegedly, Hopkins accused Stewart, then an HBO commentator, of being an Uncle Tom, which prompted the fellow commentator Larry Merchant to scold Hopkins. Taylor, for his part, remained calm and appeared unfazed by Hopkins' tactics. Despite the difference in class, Hopkins was 40 years old and fighting a younger, hard-hitting man. Moreover, Hopkins' last 3 bouts had seen him fight at a tepid pace that involved more posturing than actual punching. Thus, many wondered whether the bout would prove a passing of the torch. Who would come out victorious? When the bell rang, Hopkins' tactics failed to rival his pre-fight attitude. Both men stared at each other and managed to land in the single digits. In the second, Taylor stunned Hopkins.
You see Taylor's punches.
He didn't see that right hand well enough and was momentarily stunned.
The fight was marred by constant clinching, highlighted by brief skirmishes. In the fifth, a headbutt opened a cut on Taylor's head, Taylor was being the more active fighter, but his punches were less accurate than Hopkins's. Entering the championship rounds, Hopkins turned up the pace. Taylor did his best in returning fire, but it burned through much of his energy in the early rounds. At 40 years of age, however, Hopkins failed to mount a sustained attack and let Taylor escape. After the final bell, Taylor seemed disappointed, while Hopkins appeared jubilant. In the end, he would be shocked.
The winner by split decision and new undisputed middleweight champion of the world.
Punch stats showed an uneventful fight, in which Hopkins' late fight surge provided him a slight edge in connected blows. Taylor, however, was seen as the more active fighter in the early rounds. This was a classic case of what did you like? Taylor's activity and often half-blood punches, or Hopkins' sporadic single-shot connects. In the post-fight interview, Taylor appeared grateful for the win.
But no, Hopkins is an excellent champion, man. I love him. I thank him so much for this opportunity, and I just thank HBO.
And for Lou DiBella, the night proved cathartic.
With respect to me and Bernard, man, it's, you know, I feel like a chapter in my life is over and I can get past it, and it's a great feeling of release.
Hopkins, meanwhile, remained adamant that he'd been robbed.
I mean, I believe I won the fight. I believe the fans believe I won the fight. And Jermaine Taylor doesn't show emotions that he won the fight. So, I mean, it's clear.
Many in the boxing media criticized Taylor for tiring against an old man, and failed to see Taylor as the next great middleweight. The majority of media members also had Hopkins winning the bout. Controversy also ensued when it was revealed that Judge Dwayne Ford had scored the last round for Taylor, a stance at which Taylor had clearly lost.
The one thing that steeps everything in controversy is the one judge's scorecard where the 12th round was given to Jermaine Taylor, which is totally ridiculous.
Dwayne Ford gave the 12th round to Taylor. If Dwayne Ford gives the 12th round to Hopkins, as the other two judges did, we'd have a draw.
And that's why I think the fight should have been called. And me, I'm going to be honest with you. At 40 years old, he still outlanded the guy. He has a very good argument that he won the fight.
Hopkins claimed that the spurious defeat proved to be the punishment the establishment had been gleefully waiting to dole out, and he activated his rematch clause for late 2005. According to Ring magazine writer Joe Santoliquito, Hopkins had lobbied for the magazine to withhold giving Taylor the coveted Ring championship. The editors refused. As such, Santoliquito claims that Hopkins reneged on his promise to sign a pair of gloves for the American Cancer Society. The former champion allegedly said, "Fuck the American Cancer Society. Get Jermaine Taylor to sign them." In the rematch's build-up, Hopkins continued asserting he'd been robbed and compared it to a rape. Exasperated, Taylor compared Hopkins to a spoiled child. He also accused Hopkins of being a dirty fighter whose skills and talent were insufficient to beat him. Hopkins entered the rematch without his longtime trainer, Bowie Fischer. At first, Hopkins would claim Fischer was sick. Reporters would then ask him about rumors claiming Fischer had been fired due to financial disputes. Hopkins replied with circuitous answers. Later in November of that year, Fischer admitted to a fallout with Hopkins and blamed the Philadelphian for underpaying him. Hopkins also warned Taylor that he failed to understand the risks of boxing and referenced Levander Johnson, a boxer who died earlier that year in a bout against Jesus Chavez. Hopkins' solution was clear. Exasperated by Hopkins' antics, Taylor revealed a doll donning a pink shirt with the inscription, "Cry Baby Hopkins." The crowd laughed, while Hopkins said silently. This time, the Philadelphian promised a stoppage. The rematch arrived on December 2005. Hopkins did prove more aggressive, but he lunged in to do so, and his attack remained sporadic. Taylor failed to increase the activity, but his punches moved Hopkins. He also kept his composure, which prevented a repeat of his dramatic weakening in the championship rounds. He even performed well in the 11th. This allowed Taylor to walk away with a close unanimous decision. In the end, Hopkins managed to improve his output compared to the first bout, but Taylor also improved on his connect rate, although punch stats showed that Hopkins had once again surpassed him slightly. Still, many continued doubting Taylor. Ring magazine writer Jeff Ryan described Taylor's victories over Hopkins not as a passing of the torch, but rather the flickering of a birthday cake candle. Again, Hopkins cried robbery and claimed that if Taylor was truly special, that he should have defeated him without the judges' help. A year later, Hopkins would finally move up to light heavyweight and easily defeated Antonio Tarver, becoming one of the rare middleweights to win the linear titles at 160 and 175 pounds. After the fight, he mended fences with Emmanuel Stewart and by extension, Jermaine Taylor, who was now under Stewart's tutelage. But things ended much differently for both fighters. Immediately after the Hopkins bout, Taylor pursued the next most dangerous opponent, the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Winky Wright. The hard-fought bout ended in a controversial draw, and once again, many felt the judges had helped Taylor. Taylor defended his title 2 more times before the undefeated Kelly Pavlik ended his reign. And though he acquitted himself in the rematch, Taylor never recaptured the glory he tasted in 2005. Hopkins, meanwhile, would lose the light heavyweight championship, defeat Taylor's conqueror Pavlik, and then proceeded to set another record when he regained the light heavyweight championship, thus becoming the oldest boxer to ever win a legitimate championship, a record which still stands. The Filipino Manny Pacquiao is considered one of the best boxers ever, and perhaps the greatest pugilist of his generation. But back in the summer of 2001, few fans outside the Philippines knew his name. Back in 1998, a 19-year-old Pacquiao had defeated the flyweight champion, Chachtai Sasakul. But this was before the YouTube era, and Pacquiao remained unknown even to hardcore fans. Struggling to make weight, Pacquiao lost his title on the scale before being stopped in the 3rd round. Looking for more comfortable pastures, he skipped a division and settled at super bantamweight. Then, in 2001, he traveled to the USA to gain experience. In Los Angeles, he met the trainer, Freddie Roach. After a round of a mid-session with Pacquiao, Roach suspected he had something special. But of course, that would have to be proven in the ring. Meanwhile, the 29-year-old South African, Lelo Ledwaba, was forging his own path. In 1999, Ledwaba had won the vacant IBF title off the power puncher, John Michael Johnson. The South African defended his title 5 times, doing so abroad in the USA and the UK. By May 2001, KO magazine had Ledwaba ranked as the number 2 super bantamweight in the world. That summer, he was set to fight Enrique Sanchez, and it would take place on the big stage as part of the pay-per-view undercard for Oscar de la Hoya versus Javier Castillejo. But 2 weeks before the bout, Sanchez suffered an injury and withdrew from the bout. The IBF ushered Pacquiao in as a late replacement. Ledwaba would later admit he knew little about Pacquiao.
Tail of the tape, Berlesanola Ledwaba against Manny Pacquiao. I'll get it right, Pacquiao.
Pacquiao got off to a fast start. Time after time, the Filipino proved too fast for Ledwaba. Though Ledwaba landed some jabs. In the second, Pacquiao dropped the South African. Ledwaba returned fire, but Pacquiao continued the rampage. And in the sixth, Pacquiao wrapped it up. At 22 years old, Pacquiao had easily nabbed his second title. Years later, Ledwaba would detail Pacquiao's difficult style stating that the Filipinos' eclectic movement was impossible at the time. Ladova returned to Africa and continued boxing, scoring a win over former champion Vuyani Bongru. He retired in 2006 and passed away in 2021. As for Pacquiao, he'd made a statement his US debut. Amazingly, he lost some of his luster in his very next fight, a technical draw against the wily veteran Agapito Sanchez. But soon thereafter, Pacquiao was back at it, demolishing opponents. And in 2003, he would begin one of the greatest runs of all time. Some styles give everyone problems. And Irish trainer Brendan Ingle consistently created some of the most problematic fighters in history, such as Johnny Nelson, Nassim Hamed, and Junior Witter. But one of the progenitors of the Ingle style was Harold the Bomber Graham. Gifted with superb reflexes, Graham dazzled his opponents, his hands by his waist, daring foes to hit him. By the age of 23, Graham had collected the British, Commonwealth, and European junior middleweight titles. In 1984, now at middleweight, Graham defeated future titleist Lindell Holmes, stopping him in the 5th round. Then, he acquired the European middleweight title by halting former world titleist Ayub Kalule. Unfortunately, his rocky relationship with Brandon Ingle caused a rift, which also led Graham to neglect his training. He underestimated Sumbo Kalambe, who had lost to Kalule, and suffered his first defeat. Graham scored 3 straight wins and reunited with Ingle for another shot at the title. He would come against the body snatcher, Mike McCallum. Hailing from Jamaica, McCallum had scored stoppage wins over the murderous punching Julian Jackson, Milton McCrory, as well as one of the best knockouts of all time against the pound-for-pound hopeful Donald Curry. McCallum had yearned for a bout against the 4 kings, Duran, Hearns, Hagler, or Leonard, but according to McCallum, a sparring session with Hearns dissuaded the American from fighting him. McCallum won a world title at junior middleweight, but then lost his first bid at the middleweight belt in an upset against Sumbo Kalambe. Kalambe would later vacate the belt to fight the undefeated titleist Michael Nunn. Having both lost a close decision to the African, McCall and Graham squared off for the vacant title on May 1989. From the start, Graham's hand speed blinded McCallum. McCallum had some success in the second, but Graham remained elusive and regularly connected. The Jamaican found his groove in the third, but Graham's unorthodox rhythm prevented him from landing his vaunted bodywork. In the fifth, Graham scored a knockdown, but surprisingly, none of the judges counted it. In the sixth, Graham showed he could fight in the pocket. Graham controlled the seventh, but McCallum ended it with a big right hand. The bout remained hotly contested, but Graham lost a point in the eighth for throwing McCallum. Graham slowed down in the ninth, though he continued landing flush. Visibly tired, both men traded in the championship rounds. In the end, McCallum walked away with a split decision. Graham felt he'd won, but the fight had certainly grown closer after the fifth, and the eighth round point deduction had helped McCallum. Graham went on to score some wins and was on his way to winning a vacant middleweight title against Julian Jackson before running into a monster right hand. From there, Graham entered a bad streak before retiring. According to some reports, British star Chris Eubank avoided Graham after the bomber outboxed him in sparring. The power-punching Nigel Benn did the same. Graham enjoyed a mini comeback in the late 1990s, stopping Canadian silver medalist Chris Johnson and decisioning Vinny Pazienza. In his final title shot, Graham dropped the heavy-handed Charles Brewer before his own chin gave way to a 10th round defeat. At 38 years of age, Graham became one of the best fighters to never win a title. Meanwhile, McCallum defended against Steve Collins, Michael Watson, and gained revenge over Kalambe. He then drew and lost to James Toney before winning a light heavyweight title against Jeff Harding. At 38 years old, McCallum lost the title to Fabrice Tiozzo and later lost to a prime Roy Jones, going the distance against the younger men. In the end, both Graham and McCallum established themselves as two of the finest middleweight fighters of their era. Sylvester Stallone may have based his famous Rocky Balboa character on Chuck Wepner, but it was Rocky Marciano who served as a template for the Italian stallion's never say die approach. Born Rocco Francis Marchigiano, Marciano took up boxing during his army days. After a brief amateur career, Marciano turned pro in 1948. With his birth name difficult to pronounce, the Brockton native changed it in the hopes that it would help his popularity. But it would be Marciano's unrelenting style which would fuel his notoriety. With dynamite in each hand and a superhuman work ethic, Marciano could punch for as long as the fight lasted. By 1949, Marciano was undefeated with 24 wins. Then he took on fellow prospect Carmine Vingo. Vingo's sole loss had come via contentious decision, and the bout was designed to pit two young heavyweights in order to create a contender. Marciano started out strongly, twice dropping Vingo, but the New Yorker rallied back, nailing Marciano with big shots. But in the sixth, Marciano put Vingo out with a left uppercut. Vingo would later be transported to the hospital, and it was doubtful that he would survive. Thankfully, Vingo recuperated, but his boxing days were over. Thus, Marciano had established himself as a bruising puncher. In 1950, Marciano faced another stern test in the former fellow undefeated contender, Ronald Lastarza. The fight was a classic boxer versus puncher matchup, with Marciano pressing and Lastarza backing off and countering. Other than a knockdown scored by Marciano in the fourth round, the fight was too close to call. The final decision was rendered by the referee, who preferred Marciano's aggressiveness. Many of the ringside journalists, however, disagreed and questioned Marciano's future. Perhaps this is why Marciano was the underdog in 1951, when he took on the legendary but aging former champion, Joe Louis. Louis had shown his age in losing the title to Eder Charles in 1950, but it notched 8 wins since, and possessed a height, reach, and weight advantage over Marciano. Still, Marciano was 27 and Louis 37, ancient for the time. Marciano started off quickly and took the early rounds, but Louis warmed up his bones, and by the 6th round, the fight was close. But then, Marciano turned it up and decked Louis in the 8th. A follow-up barrage concluded matters in the same round. Marciano didn't enjoy the victory as much as he could have, saying, "I'm glad and sorry to be the guy who did it. Joe was the greatest champion in the world. Naturally, I'm proud I knocked him out. But on the other hand, I'm sorry, if you know what I mean." Though the fight signified a passing of the torch, many experts remained skeptical of Marciano, with some claiming he needed to rematch Lastarza before he could validate himself as a genuine contender. The rematch would come later. In the meantime, he worked his way to a title shot. After some wins, Marciano took on Harry Matthews in 1952. Marciano impressively knocked his opponent out. Now, some were comparing him to the legendary heavyweight, Jack Dempsey. But Marciano was still a contender, and he would have to beat Jersey Joe Walcott for the championship. Walcott had become the oldest man to win the heavyweight championship when he defeated Eder Charles. It had taken Walcott 5 tries, but he'd achieved his dream. He was a wily veteran who knew all the tricks. Years earlier, he challenged then-champion Joe Louis. Walcott twice decked the champion and befuddled him with his slick style, but the judges robbed Walcott of the championship. Walcott could also crack, as evidenced by the 3rd Charles bout, and despite being 37 years old, the same as Joe Louis, he had more left in the tank than the Brown Bomber. The bout would prove whether Marciano was the real deal or a hype job. The heavier Walcott met Marciano in the middle, and confident in his power, Walcott launched his offense early. The two men traded, and Walcott struck. It was the first knockdown Marciano had ever suffered. Like a wounded animal, Marciano fought back. Walcott continued landing bombs, but the younger man absorbed them. Walcott started the third with another left hook. The two men traded, and even the referee was excited. In the fourth, Marciano began to push Walcott back, though he was forced to eat bombs to do so. Walcott flashed his left hook, but Marciano wasn't going anywhere. Marciano powered up in the sixth, but the wily Walcott rolled with the shots and threw his own leather. Marciano was relentless, but Walcott's shots shook him. In his classic style, Marciano hit whatever he could. And he even flashed his underrated defense. The two men loaded up in the ninth. In the 10th, Marciano began making Walcott feel his age, but the champion fought back with aplomb, showing his refined defense. Walcott rallied back with a combo in the 11th as Marciano staggered, but the young Massachusetts native pressed ahead. Marciano ended it. At 29 years of age, Marciano had grabbed the coveted heavyweight title and proved he could outlast the best. Ring Magazine awarded the bout Fight of the Year honors. Marciano's punch led to one of the top 20 knockouts in boxing's history. Ring Magazine founder Nat Fleischer, a man usually economical with his praise, called the bout one of the finest heavyweight tussles he'd ever seen. At first, Walcott announced his retirement, but soon activated his rematch clause. They did it again in 1953, though this time, Walcott had spent his last bullets and was stopped in the first round. He finally retired and worked in the boxing industry, along with becoming Camden, New Jersey sheriff. As for Marciano, the Walcott bout would be the first of many wars to come. In Volume 1 of this series, we left off with Roberto Hands of Stone Duran capturing Ken Buchanan's lightweight title. The aggressive Panamanian had blasted away his recent opposition. And though he dominated Buchanan, a controversial low blow that ended the bout remained ingrained in people's minds. There had been talks of a rematch, but Duran's brain trust set him on a series of non-title bouts to celebrate his win in Panama. In the fall of 1972, Duran blasted away the competition. In November of that year, he was set for another non-title bout, this time returning to the place of his coronation, Madison Square Garden. He was expected to best his opponent, the Puerto Rican Esteban DeJesus. DeJesus had turned pro at the age of 17 and notched 32 wins with only one defeat. DeJesus was a solid boxer punch on a 16-fight winning streak and was trained by Gregorio Benitez, father and trainer of future two-division world champion Wilfred Benitez. Still, DeJesus entered the Mecca of boxing as a prohibitive underdog, but in front of 9,000 fans, DeJesus proved more than a patsy. He met Duran's aggression early, then struck first. As in the Buchanan bout, Duran barged forward, but ate many shots in return. And contrary to his fight against the Scot, Duran appeared weary of the returned leather. DeJesus boxed masterfully and held his own on the inside. Duran let his hands go, but DeJesus' skills and heart saw him through to score a 10-round unanimous decision. Stories of Duran's parting were used to soften the non-title defeat, but DeJesus had proven the superior fighter. Had Duran been overhyped? DeJesus continued his success by twice decisioning contender Ray Lampkin and stopping former junior welterweight champion Alfonso Frazier. Duran, meanwhile, defended his championship by stopping Hector Thompson and future titleist Gus Ishimatsu, while sprinkling some non-title wins. And though there were talks of a Buchanan rematch, Duran was itching for another shot at DeJesus. The second meeting would come in 1974, nearly 2 years after their first bout. There, both 22-year-olds possess identical records of 44 wins with only one defeat. From the start, DeJesus matched the scorching Panamanian heat with a sizzling left hook. A repeat of their first match seemed certain, but powered by his rabid countryman, Duran persevered. The exchanges were as brutal as the pace, and this time, Duran was a sharper fighter, moving his hands and head in tandem. By the 6th round, Duran's hellish pressure, along with the unforgiving heat, took its toll on DeJesus. Duran dropped him in the 7th, but DeJesus fought back. Duran was barbaric, blasting away at DeJesus' body. Finally, in the 11th, Duran finished DeJesus. Duran had gained his revenge. DeJesus rebounded with some stay-busy wins, and in 1975, he moved up to junior welterweight to challenge the champion Antonio Cervantes. DeJesus surrendered almost 5 inches in height, but gave Cervantes a tough outing before fading late to drop a 15-round decision. Better suited as a lightweight, DeJesus returned to 135 pounds, and in 1976, he fought Gotsi Shimatsu for his portion of the lightweight belt. DeJesus maintained the center of the ring, and his laser-like shots were too much for the Japanese, as DeJesus scored a 15-round unanimous decision. DeJesus defended it 3 times and maintained his status as Duran's #1 rival. Duran, meanwhile, defended his title 7 times, including 2 decision wins over the underrated Edwin Viduet and a stoppage over Ray Lapkin. Duran and DeJesus were the 2 top lightweights and decided to finally settle the score in early 1978. Speaking of their rivalry, Duran stated, "I don't like him for a lot of reasons. Mostly because he's the only man to ever beat me, and he's the only man to ever knock me down. I don't like him for a lot of reasons, but I have to respect him for them." Unfortunately, DeJesus had begun to dabble with narcotics by the time of the Duran rubber match. Moreover, he was facing a peak Duran. Duran started off showing his improved dimensions, boxing from the middle of the ring. DeJesus was forced into the role of aggressor and seemed ill-equipped for the task. But the Puerto Rican was too good to be totally dominated, and he gave as good as he got. Though failing to match the second bout's intensity, the rubber match had its moments. After the 6th, Duran readopted his usual style and upped the pressure. DeJesus had some success, but Duran's body shots and varied attack ground the Puerto Rican down. In the 12th, a Duran bomb dropped DeJesus. The Puerto Rican rose valiantly, but Duran concluded matters with a follow-up barrage. One of boxing's best rivalries was over. Duran was now the de facto lightweight king and would later move up for greater glory in the welterweight division. Meanwhile, DeJesus' life deteriorated with drug use. He continued winning, including a close victory over Edwin Viduet. But he was a faded star by the time of his second try at the junior welterweight crown and was stopped by Saul Mambi in 1980. Continual drug use would send DeJesus into the underworld, and in late 1980, he shot a man dead during a scuffle. DeJesus was sentenced to life in prison. There, DeJesus turned his life around, but his previous drug use returned to haunt him, as he'd been infected with AIDS. He would receive an exceptional release due to his circumstances and lived his last days as a free man. His heated rival Duran would famously visit him near the end. This earned Duran respect amongst the Puerto Ricans, and so concluded one of the best lightweight rivalries ever. Hey, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and if you are lucky, you might get one absolution into heaven. No promises made. One of boxing's origins resides in the form of traveling carnivals. These venues were notorious for sleight of hand and cheap tricks designed to make a quick buck. In many ways, that tradition has survived in the manufacturing of fighters. In the early 2000s, Adonis Stevenson made his way to the amateur ranks, eventually capturing silver at the 2006 Commonwealth Games. He turned pro that very year, and early on, his power was evident. Stevenson's career hit a skid in 2010 when he took on gatekeeper Darnell Boone, suffering a second-round stoppage. But Stevenson rebounded and spent the next 3 years knocking people out left and right. Then, in 2013, he got his hands on Boone again and dished out a beating to gain revenge by a 6-round stoppage. That same year, Stevenson got a shot at the champion, Chad Dawson. Dawson was coming off a stoppage loss to Andre Ward in the super middleweight division, but many doubted Stevenson was experienced enough to beat him. But Stevenson's power circumvented any experience gap as he laid Dawson out in the first round and captured the light heavyweight crown. Stevenson closed out the year by stopping fellow power puncher Tavoris Cloud. And Tony Bellew. By 2014, life was good for Stevenson. He signed a deal with advisor Al Heyman, who had taken over Showtime Boxing as his clandestine matchmaker and who created his own promotional outfit, Premier Boxing Champions, in 2015. On top of this, Stevenson was trained by Javon Sugar Hill, nephew of the legendary Emmanuel Stewart. Stevenson had been a late starter in the boxing game and was already in his mid-30s when he won his title. This became a concern during his 2014 bout with the unknown Andrei Shumfara. Stevenson dominated the poll early, but then faded as a challenger fired back. It took Stevenson all of his guile and willpower to hear the final bell. Stevenson then defended against a virtual unknown in Dmitry Shushtovsky. Then, in 2015, he defended against veteran Sakio Bika, a man who'd seen his best days in the super middleweight division. Stevenson dropped his opponent en route to a decision win. He then halted the unheralded Thomas Carpensi to cap off 2015. By then, Stevenson was not the only puncher in the division, as the undefeated Russian Sergei Kovalev entered the fray. Unfortunately for boxing fans, Al Heyman fighters were no longer competing on HBO, Kovalev's home, and the fight failed to materialize. Meanwhile, Stevenson's easy route led Ring Magazine to strip him of his lineal title. In 2016, Stevenson's age and technical limitations were again on display as he went to war with Thomas Williams Jr. Stevenson bailed himself out with a booming left. Stevenson was losing fans by the minute, but his bravado remained strong.
That's me, this is the biggest confidence. This is me. I'm the champ. I'm the world champ. Oh yeah.
In 2017, there was talk of pinning the undefeated Eder Alvarez, a fellow Canadian resident, against Stevenson. Alvarez was Stevenson's mandatory, but the wheels of boxing politics knitted complicated loops that left boxing fans confused. In the end, Stevenson chose to rematch Fonfara. The Canadian returned to old form, easily dispatching of Fonfara in the second round. In 2018, Stevenson finally stepped up in competition as he took on former super middleweight titleist Badou Jack. Stevenson kept the tricky Jack at bay, but midway through the bout, Stevenson, now nearing his 40s, faded as Jack took over. But Stevenson refused to surrender and returned to hurt Jack in the 10th round. In the end, the final scored a draw. By now, Stevenson was a big name in Canada's fighting capital of Montreal, but many fans were now aware of Stevenson's sordid past. Back in the late 1990s, Stevenson had been part of a street gang that prostituted women. The details of the women's brutal treatment were available in a Canadian news article. Stevenson had paid his dues during an 18-month prison stint, but many fans were slow to forget his misdeeds. Then, in 2018, Stevenson took a risk in fighting the undefeated Alexander Gvozdyk. Hailing from the Ukraine, Gvozdyk had captured bronze at the 2012 London Olympics. He turned pro in 2014 and displayed his refined style, leaping through the ranks. And though the quality of his opposition resembled Stevenson's, Gvozdyk had never fought a massive puncher. Could he deal with Stevenson's arsenal? The first round saw a lot of posturing and few landed punches. In the second, Stevenson launched plenty of left hands, and Gvozdyk did his best to deflect. Gvozdyk dropped Stevenson in the third, but the referee somehow saw it as a slip. Undaunted, Gvozdyk pecked away with his right hand, and he used the guard and footwork to nullify Stevenson's left. Wishing to retake the momentum, Stevenson fired away in the fourth, but clearly, Gvozdyk proved superior to the champion's previous opposition. It would take more than a single left hand to defeat the Ukrainian. In the fifth, Gvozdyk's speed and footwork neutralized Stevenson's shots. Stevenson wisely began his attack to the body, and it permitted some success upstairs. But Gvozdyk continued connecting. The challenger intensified the pace in the seventh, while Stevenson continued trying to find success downstairs. Gvozdyk continued darting around Stevenson in the 8th, and the champion's punches lacked snap. For the first time in years, Stevenson was clearly behind on points. He loaded up in the 9th, but Gvozdyk was too quick, too accurate, and too young. In the 10th, Gvozdyk planted his feet more, and finally, Stevenson connected. The two men traded, but Gvozdyk remained the fresher man. Gvozdyk returned to his fleet-footed style in the 11th, and midway through the round, Gvozdyk stunned the champion. And his follow-up attack sealed the deal. Insanely, judges Guido Cavalieri and Jack Woodburn had Stevenson winning the bout, while Mike Ross scored a tie. Still, Gvozdyk had taken it away from them and was now at the division's forefront. But the celebration soon dampened when Stevenson complained of dizziness in his dressing room. He was taken to a hospital, but his condition deteriorated. Within a day, doctors had placed him in a medically induced coma. His condition remained uncertain for weeks, until the end of December, when his wife announced Stevenson had awakened. But he would need to relearn how to walk, along with dealing with various neurological issues. As for Gvozdyk, he would attempt to unify the division in 2019, when he took on another murderous puncher, the Russian, Artur Beterbiev. Gvozdyk held his own during many rounds, but Beterbiev's relentless pressure prevented him from achieving his dream. Gvozdyk retired before returning early in the 2020 decade. As of his last fight in 2024, he was seen giving David Benavidez all he could handle before losing a competitive decision. They say it's easier to win a belt than to keep it. As such, successfully defending it against the best is considered one of boxing's grand achievements. During the early 1960s, Nino Benvenuti was considered one of the best amateurs in the world, with a disputed record of 120 wins and 0 losses. He culminated this legendary career with a gold medal at the 1960 Olympics and earned the Val Baker Trophy for the tournament's outstanding boxer. As a professional, Benvenuti encapsulated the great fighters of the 1970s. He fought all around the world, was unafraid to drop non-title bouts, and always improved in the rematches. Benvenuti displayed his smooth skills and underrated power as he piled up the wins. In 1965, he challenged fellow Italian Sandro Mazzinghi for the junior middleweight titles. Benvenuti captured them in impressive fashion, knocking out Mazzinghi in the 6th. He then decisioned Mazzinghi in a rematch. After some non-title bouts, Benvenuti traveled to South Korea and took on Kim Ki-soo. By most accounts, Benvenuti was winning the bout and had Tszyu hurt before a mishap with the ropes caused a 10-minute delay, and Benvenuti lost his title by split decision. The silver lining was that he could now move up to 160, as it had been difficult to make 154. In 1967, after a series of wins, Benvenuti challenged middleweight champion Emil Griffith. The fight was a fast-paced tactical affair, one which saw both men hit the canvas. In the end, Benvenuti edged many of the rounds and emerged a new middleweight champion in what proved to be Ring Magazine's Fight of the Year. They did it again later that year, and Griffith recaptured his titles. The rubber match took place in 1968, and Benvenuti settled the score by dropping Griffith in the 9th, thus recapturing his titles via unanimous decision. Benvenuti trekked on, defending his championship against tough men such as Don Fulmer and former welterweight champion Luis Rodriguez. But there were some non-title setbacks intermingled with the success. One such blemish occurred against Tom Bethea. According to reports, the American had dominated Benvenuti before the champion retired due to a rib injury. The win earned Bethea a title shot against Benvenuti, but this time the Italian returned the favor, halting Bethea in 8 rounds. By 1970, Benvenuti was past his peak, but remained a formidable fighter. It would take someone special to dethrone him. The Argentinian Carlos Monzon seemed ill-equipped for the task. Despite being an avid smoker, Monzon seemed physically fit, but the 6-feet-tall Argentinian possessed an unimpressive record forged mainly against South American unknowns. Moreover, His two recognizable opponents, Philly journeyman Benny Briscoe and the aforementioned Tom Bethea, had given Monzon hell. Some reports even indicated the two men should have been the winners. But perusing his record, one noted that he'd avenged most of his losses and draws. Moreover, he had Amilcar Brusa in his corner, a man who would later become one of the greatest trainers ever. Benvenuti started out confidently in front of his countrymen, backing Monzon up. During the clinches, Monzon showed some of the rough stuff. Benvenuti continued jabbing, but Monzon landed his share of power shots and established he belonged with the champion. In the second, Monzon landed a left hook and began pumping his own jab. Both men held the center of the ring, but when Monzon landed, he shook the champion. It was a pitched battle, with both fighters landing head-snapping shots. In the fifth, Monzon was displaying fine boxing skills, as both men traded jabs and power punches. In the sixth, Benvenuti landed a sharp right. Moments later, however, Monzon replied with heavy left hooks. Monzon remained strong in the seventh, and for the bout's first time, one man was giving ground. But the champion rallied back. Still, the jab alone failed to dominate Monzon, and Benvenuti was forced to load up. Meanwhile, Monzon continued fighting like a robot in the ninth. He absorbed Benvenuti's shots while landing the heavier blows. Any hopes of Monzon fading late dissolved as his power continues shaking the champion. Benvenuti dug down in the 11th, much to Monzon's delight. And with that, Monzon captured the middleweight crown. The fight became Ring Magazine's 1970s Fight of the Year. A rematch took place in 1971, despite Benvenuti losing a majority decision against his tune-up. This time, Monzon disposed of him in the third round. Unable to compete with the new generation, Benvenuti announced his retirement. He would later call Monzon his toughest opponent ever. Many years later, Benvenuti would visit Monzon during the Argentine's time of need. The two would spark up a friendship. As for Monzon, he would establish one of the most dominant reigns ever, but it would come at a cost. Boxing fans love a boogeyman, the unpopular fighter that all top boxers avoid. Back in 2019, the junior middleweight Jarrett Hurd had some people believing he would rule the world. And why would they think any differently? In 2016, Hurd took on veteran Jojo Dan, and the American showed everything that would make him famous. Punches in bunches, a willingness to take shots, and a comfortable size advantage. The beating he laid on Dan forced the Romanian's corner to halt the bout. In 2017, Hurd took on contender Tony Harrison. Again, Hurd showed an aversion to defense, and he walked Harrison down and stopped him in the 9th round. Hurd stepped up another level when he took on former champion Austin Trout. Trout was an elusive southpaw who owned the win over an all-time great, Miguel Cotto. His only losses came against top opposition in Saul Alvarez, Erislandy Lara, and Jermall Charlo. He'd gone the distance in all three bouts. Hurd walked Trout down, absorbing what he had to, and became the first man to hold Trout. Then, in 2018, Trout took on the ultimate spoiler, Erislandy Lara. The Cuban was even more elusive than Trout and possessed superior punching power. Lara's last loss had been a contentious decision against Saul Alvarez. As usual, Hurd walked through his opponent's bumps and suffocated Lara, dropping him in the 12th round. In the end, Hurd became the first man to beat up Lara. Now, Hurd's small contingent of fans sang his praises and prophesied their man would beat the Charlo brothers, Saul Alvarez, and anyone else residing within his division. But questions arose regarding his weight advantage. The factor was as apparent as ever when he dwarfed Lara. One wondered how Hurd managed to make the 154-pound limit. Hurd had succeeded in absorbing his opponent's offense, but his head was being rattled fight after fight. Eventually, the punishment would take its toll. 3 years earlier, the Philadelphian Julian Williams had been in Hurd's position. With quick hands, impeccable technique, and a city's legacy behind him, Williams impressed the fans, and they anointed him as the division's dark horse. In 2016, Williams entered a battle of undefeated prospects when he took on Jermall Charlo. Williams' stock crashed when Charlo dropped him in the 2nd round. Williams recuperated and did well before Charlo ran him into an uppercut. Williams returned in 2017 to outpoint veteran Ishii Smith. Then, in 2018, he took on the tough Nathaniel Gallimore. Williams was stunned in the fourth and labored to beat his opponent. Meanwhile, in 2019, fans wanted Hurd to face one of the Charlos, but the PBC promotional outfit was intent on recycling boxers and decided to match Williams with the rampaging Hurd. Many fans expected Williams to land blows on Hurd, but they also expected his fragile chin to eventually shatter. Hurd appeared just as confident. In his last bout, he'd stopped the unheralded Jason Welborn in 4 rounds. Afterwards, Hurd had said, "We definitely want Charlo. I'm calling the shots." Clearly, Williams was an afterthought. As predicted, Williams got the better of Hurd in the first round, jabbing and turning his bigger foe. In the second, Williams upped the pace, and he also fought Hurd on the inside. Williams' shots shook Hurd, but the champion replied. Then, the unexpected happened. For the first time in his pro career, Hurd had tasted the canvas. Williams jumped on him, but the round ended. Williams continued tattooing Hurd in the third. Whether inside or outside, Williams proved the superior fighter. The fourth was a repeat of the third, with Williams putting on a boxing clinic, his punches short and compact. But previous Hurd opponents had enjoyed early success before the junior middleweight overtook him. And in the fifth, the champion turned it up. Williams, however, remained undaunted and fired back. Behind on the cards, Hurd turned on the afterburners in the sixth, much to the crowd's delight. But by the midway point, Williams returned with precision bumps. Still, one wondered whether his chin could withstand another 6 rounds of furious exchanges. Both men recharged their batteries in the seventh, and it gave Williams an opportunity to pump his jab. Williams injured Hurd in the eighth, and the challenger pounced. Once again, Williams was on the champion, plastering him with textbook punches. Hurd rallied to start the ninth, but ran into Williams' punches. As the round progressed, it seemed unlikely that Hurd had inflicted enough damage to pull out his customary late-fight stoppage. Still, he remained game. Williams, meanwhile, was full of energy, much to the commentator's surprise.
Yeah, this is highly unusual to see Hurd struggling in the later rounds. I mean, usually 6, 7, 8, he turns it on.
The challenger boxed in spots, while continuing to rumble inside of others. By the end of the 11th, Williams finally showed signs of fatigue, and it gave Hurd hope. But aggression only provided the challenger more chances to score. Behind on the cards, Hurd did his best to rally in the final round, but Williams' technique never faltered. The action was furious, with Williams getting the best of it. In the end, Williams earned a unanimous decision win. An emotional Williams was finally vindicated, and that redemption had come against a 5-1 favorite. He had been one of the finest displays of boxing in recent memory, as skill and conditioning prevailed over brawn. Hurd, meanwhile, blamed himself for failing to let his hands go and talked of activating his rematch clause. The second bout would never happen. Hurd would look listless in his comeback against Francisco Santana, allegedly working on a more defensive style. Then, in 2021, he would lose to French contender Luis Arias in a higher weight class. 2 years later, he engaged in a war against Jose Armando Resendiz and was stopped in the 10th round. Williams, meanwhile, failed to fare much better. He defended his title in front of a hometown crowd in early 2020, but once again, his fragile chin gave way and was knocked out by Jason Rosario. He then suffered an upset to journeyman Vladimir Hernandez in 2021. In 2023, he was giving a shot at Carlos Adames' middleweight title, and though he fought well, he was once again halted. Still, the Williams-Hurd saga reminded us once again not to overrate a fighter. In the Mount Rushmore of boxing, Willie Pep's face looms decisively. He's considered the finest featherweight ever, the best defensive boxer of all time, and finally, one of the top 5 boxers ever. That's no small feat. But every all-time great has a nemesis, and Pep was no exception. Born in 1922, Pep compiled 65 amateur bouts before turning pro. Once in the paid ranks, he churned out 62 straight wins. One of those victories came in 1942 when he outpointed featherweight champion Chalky Wright to nab the title. There's not much footage from the first half of Pep's career, but all accounts paint him as a defensive master who used head movement, footwork, and deft parries to deflect his opponent's offense. One legend has him winning an entire round against Jackie Graves without having thrown a single punch. Historians have since poked substantial holes into the story, but such was Pep's skill that some still believe he probably succeeded the feat against a different opponent. Pep's first blemish came in 1943 against former champion Sammy Angot in a competitive non-title bout. After that, Pep scored another 73 wins. There, he drew against Jimmy McAllister in 1945, but proceeded to beat him twice, once by stoppage. It seemed as if Pep was unstoppable, but in 1947, Pep boarded a flight. The plane crashed in Millville, New Jersey, killing 3 of its passengers. Pep survived, but suffered a broken leg and 6 fractured vertebrae. But Pep's recuperative powers proved as impressive as his boxing skills, and he was back in the ring that very year. However, pundits noticed a decline in his skills, but that would be the least of his problems. Having moved to New York City early in his life, Sandy Saddler turned pro in 1944. He was 17 years old. He suffered a knockout loss in his second bout, and it would prove the only stoppage defeat of his entire career. He moved up to featherweight, and in his second year as a pro, he went 24-0 with 17 knockouts. Saddler stood at 5 feet and 8.5 inches tall, giant for the division. He also packed dynamite in his fists. And though he failed to rival Pep's pugilistic skills, Saddler was an adroit exponent of the dark arts and gained notoriety for being a bad sportsman. By the time of their 1948 meeting, Saddler had incurred several losses on his record. Pep, meanwhile, possessed a 134-1-1 record and walked in as a 3-1 favorite. Saddler proved dangerous in the first round. Pep was back to his old self in the second, winning the round. But Saddler proceeded to drop him numerous times in the third, and then dumped Pep with a left hook in the fourth to capture the championship. At 26 years of age, Pep appeared finished, but 4 months later in 1949, he was back in the ring with Saddler. This time, Pep was a 7-5 underdog. From most accounts, the fight remained a challenging affair, but Pep turned back the clock. Looking like a prime champion, Pep was a defensive marvel and regained his championship. Pep would later call it the finest display of boxing he ever delivered. He went on to defend his title 3 more times, before encountering Saddler in a 1950 rubber match. There, Pep did well in the first 2 rounds, before Saddler dropped him. Pep continued boxing, and won most of the rounds. According to the ringside press, both men inflicted facial damage. Saddler continued pressing, and Pep, suffering from a dislocated shoulder, quit. Pep would later complain that Saddler's rough wrestling had caused the injury, but Pep had been clinching as well. Both men notched a series of wins and agreed to a 4th match in 1951. The bout would be shown in movie theaters across the USA and attracted more than 13,000 spectators at the Polo Grounds in New York City. It would be a memorable bout, but for all the wrong reasons. Saddler used his strength advantage and barged forward, while Pep punched and turned him. As in the third bout, Pep returned to his classic self, befuddling Saddler with finesse. Then, the clinching happened. Constantly, both men held and hit. Pep continued outboxing Saddler, but another heavy tussle scored a knockdown against him. Pep landed the cleaner blows, but Saddler continued pressing. The bout was a classic boxer versus puncher affair, but it was devolving into a bar fight. According to the ringside press, both men demonstrated the worst of the dark cards. The 2 men started the 6th by trading, but Pep knew better than to exchange with a power puncher. The grappling and rule-breaking continued, so much so that referee Ray Miller's voice grew hoarse. Saddler chased, but seemed intent on continuing the grappling. In the 7th, Pep tried a judo maneuver, and the ensuing action sent the ref to the canvas. There was some punching in between the mauling. Then, Pep, citing a white gash on his face, retired. It had been one of the dirtiest boxing fights of all time. The New York Commission suspended both men, perhaps because of the desultory nature of the 4th meeting. The Sadler-Pep series ranks behind other rivalries. Still, it involved 2 of the finest featherweights of all time. Pep continued boxing, but failed to regain his championship. Sadler continued defending his title, and even managed to engage in another foul-filled affair against the Filipino Gabriel Flash Elorde in 1956. Sadler would later retire that same year after a car accident. Earlier, we saw one of Mexico's most promising Olympic prospects falter, but it wasn't the only crash and burn story to come out of the Sydney Olympics. Though none of the American boxers nabbed gold in the 2000 Olympics, there were many promising boxers whose styles were better suited for the pro ranks, and promoters were desperate to sign them. Main events wrapped their arms around featherweight silver medalist Rocky Juarez, Gary Shaw signed super middleweight Jeff Lacey, and finally, Lou DiBella snatched bronze medalist Jermaine Taylor and silver medalist Ricardo Williams Jr. At only 19 years of age, Williams Jr.'s dossier included a plethora of amateur titles. Not only was he a quick and mobile boxer, but he was a southpaw as well. He dazzled in the 2000 Olympics against the Cuban Diogenes Luna, rallying from behind to reach the finals. In the gold medal bout, Williams lost to amateur standout Muhammad Abdullaev. But Williams Jr. had made his mark, and promoter Lou DiBella shocked the boxing world when he gave him a record-breaking $1.4 million contract. Too fast and too slick, Williams easily won his professional bouts, and people wondered whether they were watching the next American great. But worrying signs surfaced early on. Some felt that Williams Jr. should have been fighting at 135 pounds instead of 140. Then, in November 2002, Williams Jr. was to appear on the Barrera Tapia undercard. His opponent would be former junior welterweight champion, Teron Millette. Millette was a hard puncher and posed a threat to the young Williams Jr. But Williams Jr. came in more than a pound overweight and forfeited $10,000. Despite still being a prospect with fewer than 10 fights, the fine was nothing to Williams, and some wondered whether he was spoiled. Williams easily outboxed Millette for all 10 rounds, but the performance, along with Williams' pre-fight antics, had been underwhelming. Now, wishing to increase his profile, Williams Jr. was set to fight Juan Carlos Rubio, the man who'd upset Uber prospect Francisco Bojado. But Rubio was pulled out of the bout at the last minute. In stepped Juan El Pollo Valenzuela. Valenzuela had lost his last 2 bouts against up-and-coming boxers, but he'd also knocked out contender Juan Diaz with a snapping left hook. The man could crack. On fight night, Valenzuela jumped on Williams Jr., but the aggressiveness appeared ineffective against the American's deft footwork. Williams Jr. kept Valenzuela turning in the second, but one noticed that Valenzuela failed to respect the power. Valenzuela maintained the intensity in the third and landed punches. The 2 men stood in the center of the ring during the fourth. Was Williams Jr. boxing this way to get respect? Or was he out of shape? Whatever the reason, Valenzuela's success grew. Williams Jr. got back on his back in the 5th. But Valenzuela kept coming. In the 6th, Williams started off moving, but soon, Valenzuela was back on him. By the 7th, it became clear that Valenzuela knew how to get close to southpaws, and he strung combos together against the elusive Williams. On top of this, the American was slowing down. In the 8th, a tired Williams Jr. stood still, and Valenzuela teed off on him. The American tried returning to basics in the 9th, but Valenzuela's bodywork proved effective, and he pinned Williams Jr. in place. With the fight too close to call, both men let their hands go. A tired Williams Jr. did his best, laying it all on the line. In the end, he lost a unanimous decision. Within the span of 2 years, another highly touted 2000 Olympian had suffered his first loss. But whereas Bojado returned to avenge his defeat, Williams Jr. never received the opportunity. Instead, he lost to a different fighter. By then, he was commiserating with the wrong crowd and would be jailed for drug dealing. He returned in 2008 before running into French contender Carson Jones. Williams would suffer a stoppage loss. He notched a few more wins before retiring in 2014. As for Valenzuela, he rode the wave of his upset victory by receiving more TV dates and continued displaying his heavy hands. But an eye injury intervened, and Valenzuela retired in 2008. Since then, promoters have returned to the reserved nature when signing prospects, no matter how spectacular the accolades. They say boxing will break your heart, whether as a fan or as a participant. Sometimes, corruption plays a part. Other times, it's Father Time that does it. But most heartbreaking of all is misfortune. In 1941, Joe Louis was the undisputed heavyweight champion. The Alabama native was quick as a cobra and packed dynamite in his fists. Back in 1937, Louis had snatched the crown away from the Cinderella Man, James Braddock, rising from the canvas to pummel the popular champion. Louis endured a tough outing to defeat Tommy Farr and scored his first defense. But 1938 became his breakout year as he avenged his sole loss by trouncing Max Schmeling in under a round. The bout made Louis an American hero, but a lack of suitable contenders saw him fight nondescript opposition, which would subsequently be known as the Bum of the Month Club. Louis also endured some embarrassment when he was dropped by the portly Tony Galento during one defense, before the champion dished out a beating. As it turns out, brawn alone would prove inefficient against Louis. Born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Billy Conn skipped an amateur career, turning pro at the age of 16. Conn learned on the job, compiling a record of 8 wins and 6 losses. But soon, a competent boxer began to emerge. He rolled out 27 straight wins, including victories over Vince Dundee, Babe Risco, young Corbett III, and future Hall of Famer Fritzy Civic. Conn was only 20 years old. In 1939, he earned his way into Madison Square Garden and scored a 10-round decision over middleweight champion Fred Apostoli. By then, Conn was a smooth boxer. His only blemish was a severe lack of punching power. He gathered all his talent in 1939 and outboxed the light heavyweight champion Melio Bettina. Conn defended his belt against Bettina in a rematch, and then boxed past Gus Lesevich. Conn dazzled by scoring more victories until 1941. Content with what he'd achieved at 175 pounds, Conn aimed for greatness and put Joe Louis in his crosshairs. The fight would represent the classic boxing dichotomy: the smooth, light-punching boxer with the size disadvantage versus the larger, power-punching heavyweight. On fight day, Louis weighed in at 199.5 pounds, whereas Conn weighed 174. However, some reports stated that Louis was at 204 pounds and Conn at 169. In front of 54,000 people, Conn pulled out the side-to-side movement. But soon, the bigger Louis imposed himself. Despite being a heavyweight, Louis struck with shock and quickness. Khan weathered the storm and caught Lewis coming in. After some perilous exchanges, Khan began beating Lewis to the punch. Lewis remained relentless and fired sickening body shots along with an assortment of power punches. Khan continued moving and peppered a slowing Lewis. Now, Khan's size disadvantage benefited him as he continued fighting at a tempo that Lewis was unable to cope with. The champion tried regaining the momentum in the 12th, but Khan stunned him. With victory in his grasp, Khan went for the gusto in the 13th. The round was a war, and the exchanges gave Lewis a chance to land his bombs. As the round transpired, it was clear that Khan had miscalculated. Ahead on 2 of the scorecards, Khan only needed to win 1 more round in order to walk away the heavyweight champion. But the light heavyweight with the paltry knockout record had flown too high and was knocked out. Years later, he would be quoted as saying, "I could knock out anybody, and I tried to knock out Joe Louis." Immediately after the bout, Khan appeared in good spirits.
It was a great fight tonight, and I know that Uncle Mike's going to give me another chance, and I know I can win it. I guess I had too much to win for tonight, and I tried to knock him out. Otherwise, I'd have won easy.
It is said that he told Louis, "Hey Joe, why didn't you just let me have the title for 6 months?" Louis replied, "I let you have it for 12 rounds, and you couldn't keep it. How could I let you have it for 6 months?" Both men scored more wins, with Khan scoring a victory over Tony Zale at a catchweight. But in 1942, Khan and Louis joined the war effort, thus putting their career on hold for 4 and 2 years respectively. The two men rematched in 1946, though the fight lacked the drama of their first meeting, and Louis stopped Khan in the 8th round. Khan retired after the defeat. Louis continued defending his title, but his prowess would soon decline. Years later, Khan proved that though he was a light hitter for pro boxers, he remained dangerous to the layman.
It's the would-be robber decked in a Squirrel Hill convenience store by former fight champ Billy Khan.
Was it a left or a right? I think it was a left hook, you know, it's just... You have to hit him with your favorite punch.
Still, the Khan-Louis fight remains an example of a small good man unable to best a good big man, as well as a cautionary tale for current boxers, that oftentimes discretion is the better part of valor. Weight hopping never ceases to amaze boxing fans, and the fun lies in wondering how far up in weight the boxer can go. But in the days of fewer titles and even fewer weight classes, being the champion in more than one division was the stuff of legend. Standing at 5 feet and 5.5 inches tall, Henrry Armstrong turned pro out of necessity during the early 1930s. Legend has it that he was delivering newspapers when he saw an article about the boxer Kid Chocolate, who'd earned a $75,000 prize. On the spot, Armstrong thought that fighting for money would make for suitable employment. He turned pro at 18 years old and received a rude welcome, suffering a stoppage loss. He fought 4 days later and scored his first win, one of many to come. Forbidden from fighting white boxers on the East Coast, Armstrong trekked his way out west and became a Californian and Mexican staple. Armstrong developed his skills as a featherweight, beating men such as former champion Juan Zurita and Mike Beluis. Armstrong also took out one of the top Mexican boxers ever in Baby Arizmendi. During the mid-1930s, Armstrong lost the first 2 bouts to the Mexican. But by 1936, Armstrong had developed his all-action, take-no-prisoners style and dominated the Mexican in California. Among the 16,000 spectators was featherweight champion P.D. Saron, who allegedly said, "I'm glad I'm not the one in there with Armstrong tonight." The win caught the attention of entertainer Al Jolson, who, along with Eddie Meade, chose to co-manage Armstrong. At that time, heavyweight champion Joe Louis was boxing's star. But Jolson wanted Armstrong to upstage the Alabama native. Armstrong would later say of Jolson, "Jolson never knew much about boxing, but I figured he knew fame. Him and his Hollywood ideas. They said, win 3 titles, and you'll be almost as famous as Joe Louis." I said, "Was that all?" Jolson said, "No, you've got to do it in 6 months." They didn't want much. In 1937, Armstrong made his Madison Square Garden debut, stomping the familiar Mike Beluis. Armstrong scored close to 20 fights that year before getting a shot at Cerrone. By then, Armstrong had built the reputation of a destroyer and would soon earn the nickname Homicide Hank. But Cerrone surprised the world by standing his ground and was ahead on the cards before Armstrong, then at the peak of his powers, overwhelmed him in the 6th round. Armstrong was now the featherweight champion of the world. He continued notching fights at a breakneck pace, including victories over rival Arizmendi and future featherweight champion Chalky Wright. Armstrong now eyed Lou Amber's lightweight crown, but the lightweight champ's brain trust suggested Armstrong fight for the welterweight title first. Never one to shy from a challenge, Armstrong hopped to the 147-pound division in 1938 and took on the champion, Barney Ross. Ross was a skilled and perfectly conditioned boxer who'd scored wins over Seferino Garcia, Tony Canzoneri, and Jimmy McClarnon. He also held a weight advantage over Armstrong. On the 3rd, Armstrong fought at his usual frenetic pace and dished out a beating that Ross famously endured for 15 rounds. He never fought again. Armstrong now held the featherweight and welterweight titles. Later that year, Ambrose accepted his challenge and placed his lightweight title on the line. Ambrose was a clever boxer who held wins over Tony Canzoneri, Jimmy Vaughn, Baby Arizmendi, and the hard-hitting Pedro Montañez. Moreover, contrary to Barney Ross, Ambrose was in his prime. For both Armstrong and Ross, history was on the line. Ambrose matched Armstrong's toughness, but Armstrong's pace was overwhelming. Armstrong sent Ambrose to the canvas in the 5th and 6th rounds. But Ambrose was landing his share of bombs, and Armstrong suffered from lacerations and swelling, including a gash inside his mouth. Ambrose mounted a rally, which agitated the crowd. Armstrong was spitting out so much blood that the referee threatened to stop the bout. To avoid defeat, Armstrong refused his mouthpiece so that he could swallow the blood. The two men provided 5 rounds of fury, which would later place their bout at number 12 in Ring Magazine's best fights of all time. In the end, the decision was close thanks to multiple point deductions against Armstrong for low blows. But Homicide Hank made history. He now held the featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight titles, and he'd accomplished this in less than a year, scoring 16 straight wins. After the Ambrose fight, Armstrong required 37 stitches to close the wound in his mouth. He would later call that bout the toughest of his career. Armstrong was now challenged with a conundrum. Which belts would he keep? He decided to vacate the featherweight title and racked up the defenses. In 1939, Armstrong rematched Ambrose with the lightweight championship on the line. The bout proved to be another war, but this time, Ambrose walked away the winner, regaining his title. Armstrong remained the welterweight champion and defended his title an astonishing 19 times in the span of 2 years. In 2004, Ring Magazine classified it as the 5th greatest title reign of all time, and it remains the record for most welterweight title defenses. In 1940, Armstrong went for a record 4th division title when he challenged former victim Seferino Garcia for his portion of the middleweight crown. The bout ended in a contentious draw, which some claimed should have been a win for Armstrong. Not long thereafter, Armstrong lost his welterweight title to Fritzi Zivik via unanimous decision. Armstrong fought valiantly in the rematch in 1941, but was halted in the 12th round. More wins followed, but at 28, Armstrong was finished as a championship fighter, and one of his famous post-prime losses came to the future pound-for-pound behemoth, Sugar Ray Robinson. Outside the ring, Armstrong lived how he fought, recklessly spending his money. He retired in 1945. Destitute, Armstrong turned to alcoholism, but bounced back from the abyss to become a Baptist minister back in St. Louis. He also taught boxing to the next generation. Today, many fighters have won titles across multiple divisions, but none have ever done it in as short a time as Armstrong, nor has any fighter laid claim to being the king in 3 divisions simultaneously. Because of this, Armstrong is usually considered, at worst, one of the top 5 boxers ever. Fighters in the lower weight divisions fail to receive as much attention as their heavier colleagues. And it's a shame, because the bantamweight division offered perhaps the best fighter most people have never heard of. Standing at 5 feet and 4 inches tall, Eder Jofre packed power in both hands. He could deliver his payload from the mid-range or from the outside. But despite being labeled a puncher, he performed with finesse and could box when he wanted to. Born in a fighting family in Brazil, Jofre fought in the 1956 Olympics, but lost in his second bout. He turned pro in 1957. The South American boxing scene was a rough setting, and young fighters were often thrown into the deep end. To illustrate this point, note that Jofre's third professional bout was a 10-rounder. In 1959, he took on the more experienced Leo Espinosa. With only 25 pro bouts, Jofre was scared. He had nothing to fear, as he ended up dropping Espinosa in the fourth and won a 10-round unanimous decision. Now confident, Jofre took on his Argentine rival, Ernesto Miranda. They had fought 2 contests, which were deemed draws, but in the third meeting, in 1960, Jofre won a 15-round decision. The bout had been for South American bragging rights, and Miranda appeared to take the loss to heart. He wrote a series of insulting letters to Jofre's family, which angered the Brazilian, so Jofre fought Miranda for a 4th time and stopped him inside 3 rounds. Later that year, he fought Claudio Barrientos, the man who defeated him in the Olympics. Jofre dropped him multiple times, en route to an 8th-round stoppage. Jofre continued piling up the wins, and his performances won him a ticket to the big time. In the summer, he traveled to the famous Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles and took on contender Jose Medel. Now on the grand stage, Jofre flaunted his arsenal, exchanging bombs against the Mexican. The bout saw the 2 men hurt. But Jofre was too much for Medel and halted him in the 10th. The win earned him a title shot against another Mexican, Eloy Sanchez. Sanchez had lost most of his big fights, with the exception of his most famous win, an upset stoppage over the great Jose Becerra. Sanchez was responsible for retiring the champion and was confident he'd drive away the Brazilian's challenge. It started off as another war. But Jofre's superior accuracy and two-fisted attack toppled Sanchez. Jofre now held a portion of the bantamweight crown, and to settle matters, he took on the Irishman, Johnny Caldwell. Caldwell had bested the great Algerian, Alphonse Halimi, and offered his piece of the crown by challenging Jofre. Fighting in Brazil, Caldwell tried his best, but Jofre's momentum was unstoppable, and he delivered a beating that forced Caldwell's manager to throw in the towel. Much later, Caldwell would say Eder Jofre was the greatest bantamweight and the hardest hitter for his weight of all time. Jofre defended his championship a couple more times, sprinkled in with some non-title wins. He also defeated Colombian hero Bernardo Caraballo, stopping him in 7. By 1965, Jofre had scored 17 stoppages, 9 of those taking place in title bouts. But making the 118-pound limit was growing difficult. He traveled to Japan to face former flyweight champion fighting Harada. Harada had lost to Jose Medel, but was hitting his stride. The bout took place in Japan, and Harada jumped on Jofre, setting a scorching pace. He hurt Jofre in the 4th, but the champion weathered the storm and began landing his bombs. Harada continued raining the shots, but he took a big right in the 14th. Jofre did his best to finish him, but it was too late. The Brazilian insisted he'd won, and in 1966, he returned to Japan for the rematch. This time, Jofre started out strong, but Harada kept coming. Jofre tried to run his opponent onto something big, but Harada was relentless and won another close decision. Tired of making weight, Jofre retired at the age of 30. He remained idle for 3 years before returning as a featherweight in 1969. He scored 13 wins across 4 years. Then, in 1973, at 37 years of age, he took on Jose Legra. Legra was a stylish Cuban who, years earlier, had lost to another comebacking fighter in Vicente Saldivar. But he'd recently acquired a vacant title and was 7 years younger than Jofre. The mobile Legra boxed from afar, but Jofre kept up with him. Legra beat Jofre to the punch in the second, and the champion dropped Jofre in the third. But Jofre still had his experience and his power, and he buckled Legra in the fourth. The bout turned into an intense boxing match, with Legra boxing from long range and Jofre stalking. Legra jabbed and tried to keep Jofre off balance, but the Brazilian's refined technique allowed him to press forward. Jofre landed his share of jabs and long shots in what was a close chess match. Legra hurt Jofre to the body in the 14th round and went for the finish. The final round was close, but Legra appeared to edge it. Still, Jofre was awarded a majority decision and became a two-division champion. It was one of the best comebacks in boxing. Jofre then defended it against another comebacking fighter, the great Vicente Saldivar. Unfortunately, there's no available footage for this bout. Years earlier, Saldivar had pulled off one of the greatest career comebacks. After 2 years of inactivity, Saldivar was confident he could do it again. But despite being the older fighter, Jofre had remained active since his own comeback. The first 3 rounds were competitive until the Brazilian turned it on and stopped Saldivar in the 4th round. Unfortunately, boxing and politics intervened and Jofre was stripped of his title. He scored 7 more wins all the way up to 1976, but retired at the age of 40. To illustrate Jofre's longevity in the sport, consider this: he turned pro when Rocky Marciano retired and ended his career during Muhammad Ali's second heavyweight reign. That's longevity. During Jofre's career, the great Willie Pep sang his praises, saying they'd love him here in the States. Another legend, Barney Ross, said, "He's a marvel of boxing perfection. He does things in the ring that I never expected to see again. There is nothing he cannot do." Jofre later entered the life of politics. For a while, the only person more famous than him in Brazil was Pelé. Today, Jofre is considered one of the hardest punchers ever, as well as one of the best fighters of all time.